News anchors ask me, so was Tipu the Aurangzeb of the south? I said, no, Aurangzeb was the Tipu of the north. Calicut or Kozhikode faces the maximum brunt of his tortures. 4 lakh people, according to his own words, converted there. For someone like this to actually have a Tipu Jayanti, would you have a Hitler Jayanti in Israel or Germany? I mean, it's and that too by a elected state government on taxpayers' money.
You've documented some crazy stuff. Scary. I mean, even when I was reading it, it's gory.
You have the United Nations Convention on Prevention of Crime of Genocide. It clearly says if there is an intent to actually target someone on the basis of identity, race, color, religion, sex, so that is actually termed as genocide. We can call this as a genocide of the Hindus and Christians of South India.
A large portion of Pakistani politicians who really believe in all this.
In 1965, when the Indo-Pak War was going on, there was an Operation Somnath. The 5 battleships, the navy ships that they commissioned, PNS Babar, there was PNS Jahangir, there was PNS Shah Jahan, there was PNS Alamgir, Aurangzeb, and a PNS Tipu Sultan. Now I can understand the first 4 because what Pakistan today is, the Mughal Empire was a part of that. But sitting in Pakistan, why were they commemorating a South Indian Kannada province of a Tipu Sultan?
So Imran Khan idolizes Tipu Sultan.
They have learned their history well. It's only we, pea-brained Indians and particularly fed with Marxist history, we give a cover fire for all of this, not realizing that in the process you're actually singing that tune.
Namaste, Jai Hind. You're watching or listening to another edition of the ANI podcast with Smita Prakash. My guest today is noted historian Vikram Sampath, who's undoubtedly one of the most convincing storytellers of our times. His new book, Tipu Sultan, has hit the stands. If you're a student of history or just curious to know about whether Tipu was a freedom fighter, a hero, or a hated bigot who murdered thousands of Hindus, this book is one to read. Vikram has given an extensive bibliography. It is years of painstaking research on the life and times of one of the most controversial figures in Indian history. Thank you, Vikram, for coming in for this podcast. I'm really excited about discussing the book with you. And always happy to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Smita. You've taken 2 years to call me back on the podcast. I hope the first experience was not so bad that on the way.
The podcast itself is 2 years old. But I'll tell you one thing. If you write this kind of copious stuff, you'll scare away anybody, okay? So when you told me about this book and I saw this, I said, I don't mind not being the first. You were going to give me the first podcast. I said, I don't mind being the first, but this is a challenge because I've never had an author whose book I've not read.
Correct.
Right? So I want to read it cover to cover, and I knew I can't do that, and you're going to go to all my competitors before me. So, Vinamr and Kushal, I know that you had Vikram on your show before me.
No competition at all, Smita. You're numero,
Sumane. Don't go on this, Sumane. He's, of course, they did a great job. But
that's the best part of, conversing with people like you particularly. And I'm not saying this just to praise you. I can see the number of notes you've taken, the post-its you've put, which kind of, it makes it an informed conversation. Otherwise, it's a usual, why did you write this book? How long did it take? I mean, I'm bored of answering those, which...
But that's also a fabulous story. I have to tell you this. First, you tell me your story about, which you have on the other podcast, I know.
Yeah.
But of course, we have to begin with why you wrote the story and the story about your mother's promise, the one that you made to her. And there is one part in which you talk about, about how that sort of Tipu Sultan. Anyway, I'll let you go and then I'll bring in my element to that. Otherwise, I'll have all the viewers and listeners saying, "Tu to chup karna, guest ko bolne de."
In the comments, right?
Yeah. That's always there.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, whether I like him or hate him, I owe everything in my literary career to Tipu Sultan, quite perversely, because I was 12 or 13 years old and honestly hated history growing up, like a lot of Indians.
Seriously?
Who just don't like mugging up dates, which war was fought in which year. Even now it's so
But
tough.
you to give the dates now whenever.
Now it's part of occupational hazard. But those days it was quite tough. And while that was happening, Sanjay Khan's serial came on. The only channel we all watched those days was Doordarshan. So, Sword of Tipu Sultan, I'm sure you remember. And to highlight Hyder Ali was like that very handsome guy. Shahbaz Khan or someone played his role, right? I mean, a lot of women were going gaga over him.
Sanjay Khan did Tipu, that I know.
Yeah. In fact, in reality, Hyder was, he was shown in that serial like this really muscular, nice bearded guy. But in reality, Hyder did not have a single strand of hair on his face.
He used to get it plucked
out, including his eyebrows
Yeah.
and his hair. So he was like shining white. Just you can imagine how that person would be. So distortion, I think, started from that level of physical appearance of the characters. And of course, to show both father and son in a good light, you had the Wadiyar Maharaja, Immadi Krishnaraj Wadiyar, from whom Hyder snatched the throne, was like this obese retard who was dancing with the court dancer.
Corpulent completely.
Yeah, Nartaki, hum aapko dikhate hain kaise karna hai. And I mean, it was quite something to see the Maharaja of Mysore in that state. And the Maharani, the very, very sagacious Rani Lakshmi Ammanni, whom I really, if I ever want to meet some character of the past and have a conversation with, it would be her, because the sagacity with which she, even after being in house arrest by the father and son, that she was put into to actually come out and get the throne back for her family was quite something. And she was also shown in that serial, if you remember, this very wicked, vampish woman who was always had one eyebrow up and scheming and
So, strangely, I didn't see this.
Really?
No, because though it was, I mean, I was a student at that time also, my father had this thing that read about it. Don't watch these historical serials. And then,
he did a...
yeah, maybe, I don't know what it was, but he was like very adamant on this, don't watch. But this one especially so.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, because what happened was that he was working in the Information Broadcasting Ministry, and the Information Broadcasting Minister, Upendra, was, and there was this whole thing, remember when you mentioned that, when they came and they said that...
The Malayali, Bombay Malayali Samajam and so many others.
So take this show off because it's historically inaccurate, it's incorrect. There was this big thing which was happening, and my father was really livid that, that he is not giving the time of the day, and this inaccuracies are happening, and he was at that time, it was like, see, this is what happened. Right? And then, many years later, the whole controversy happened again because Tipu Jayanti and all that. This I'm talking about 2014.
15 it started.
For 2014 or 2015 or something. And I was on a TV debate. And at that time, it was like Tipu Jayanti, why? So I just like loosely commented. I said, yeah, I mean, it's been going on for so long. How does it matter? Just do it and be done with it. Why do you want to again rake up hurt sentiments? So let it be done. Lo and behold, my father calls him and said, Ninki, sagottilva, nanatke helido. Read! Why are you going and defending this? Did you not read about Tipu Sultan? So I I had this recall when I was reading. Everyone
has a Tipu story of their own.
Everybody has a Tipu story of their own. Yeah.
But I'm fortunate that my parents didn't say don't see this serial, because had I not seen it, I wouldn't be sitting in front of you today as a historian. I'd probably be in my boring day job in some corporate company, calculating profit and loss for some American firm, thinking I'll die one day with not even the street dog, knowing who this person is. So that time, if you remember, there was also, I think, a fire in the Premier Studios.
Correct.
In Bangalore, and Sanjay Khan's face had got burnt. And Kannada media, all the gossip, they said this is the curse of the Wadiyar. For the way he was shown, this is what Sanjay Khan got. So somewhere, I don't know, I was seeing all this, and really, Smita, I think some things are destined, serendipity. My family has nothing to do with Mysore at all. I'm half Tamilian, half Maharashtrian. We're living in Bangalore. But even then, my parents too, they knew nothing of the Wadiyars and so on. But the general perception in Karnataka, at least southern Karnataka till now, is Namma Maharajaru. They are our kings. Even in old Mysore, Along with the photos of gods and goddesses, you would have photos of Nalvadi Krishnaraj Wadiyar, who was called Rajarshi by someone none less than Gandhi. And Gandhi even wondered if a province like Mysore even needed freedom when everything was so perfect there. Jai Chamraj Wadiyar, the last ruler, and so on. So people have a lot of reverence for them. Yaduvir, who's the scion of the family, is now an MP from Mysore and Kodagu. So my parents also were like, how could they show the Maharaja like this and so on. So I don't know what turned inside me. For a person who found history so boring, this became a very joyous journey of self-exploration. Never once with the idea that, I'm going to write a book out of it, I'm going to become a historian. It was just, what do they say, Swanta Sukhaya, just for your own happiness, the joys of discovery, a self-initiated, self-motivated, more importantly, self-funded project for a lower middle class family which was just trying to, eke their living out. So, hats off to my parents, whom I tortured, every vacation after that for 10 long years.
Take you to Mysore?
To go to Mysore, meet members of the royal family, some archive is there, somebody who would give me some little piece of information about initially just that one king and queen. And those days I could also sketch and paint and all that. So I would sit in the palace and, make portraits of these Maharajas. I don't know what that madness was. I think you're just destined, some Purva Janma thing happening in your life. In fact, my father was so angry at some point. He said, I'm not coming inside that palace. He would just wait outside. I've seen every chappa of this palace. I don't want to see it again.
But every time I've gone back to the palace to see the museum and things, I just feel that I take back something different. Whether from the painting, maybe it's like that with every museum, I don't know. But every time I go back, I see something different. Like sometimes I would notice the jewelry, sometimes I would notice the opulence, sometimes the architecture.
The paintings. Ravi Verma's.
So that's what, the jewelry in the paintings would fascinate me. Sometimes the lighting in a particular manner.
It's still one of the better maintained.
So I can understand why you would keep wanting to go back.
I don't know. Yeah, it was just such madness, and it became a family project. My Ajji, I didn't know how to read and write Kannada those days. I learnt it later. She would help me translate some of the Hale Kannada. There was one Shriman Maharaja Ravara Vamshavali, and that was in Hale Kannada, which was so difficult to comprehend. She would, read something and narrate it to me, literally Ajji Kathe, grandmother's tales, which she would pass on to me, and I would make this little booklet of sorts. It was a log book where I'd have all these scrapbooks and so on. And after 10 long years, even while I was doing my engineering entrance exams and doing all of that, this madness continued. And the interest also then, expanded not to just that one king and queen, but the entire dynasty. And the Wadiyars ruled for 600 long years, from 1399, and after the fall of Vijayanagar, establishing themselves as a major autonomous power under Raja Wadiyar, till the time of India's independence. But lo and behold, we didn't have a single book which in the modern times, which covered this entire span of their political history, the economic, the social, the cultural history, and in some ways also the foundations of modern Karnataka. Today, if we are talking of Karnataka, and particularly Bangalore being this knowledge capital, IT center, it just didn't happen one fine day. The foundations of that were laid by the later Wadiyars, their illustrious Dewans, Sir M. Vishweshwaraya, whose name is tough to pronounce for some people, but Diwan Mirza Ismail.
But during elections can pronounce.
Not even then. So people like this. And just two instances, when the Krishnaraj Sagar Dam was to be constructed, the budget required for that far exceeded the state budget. So the royal family under Krishnaraj Wadiyar IV actually collects all the jewelry, the golden plate, silver utensils, everything from the palace, pawn it at competitive rates in Bombay, and raise the seed capital for the dam. And that dam is the one which provides water to a large part of southern Karnataka, and of course the perennial fight between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, which happens because of the Kaveri river. So, and there was another instance where the British, the Royal Society, they wanted to establish an institute for excellence in India, and they sent Sir William Ramsay to look for a good place. And Bangalore those days had good infrastructure. Today it's a politically incorrect thing to say that, and I say that as a Bangalorean. They come looking, and Bangalore was one of the options. And at the same time, you had Roorkee also bidding for this. Krishnaraj Wadiyar's mother, another very sagacious lady, Kempa Nanjam Manni, Vani Vilasa Sannidhana, Vani Vilasa Hospital that is there in Bangalore after her. She seized opportunity in this, and she was hardly, well read herself. She said this institute is something of importance. So before Roorkee could catch the worm, she went and gave, I think, 50,000, a generous grant, about 300 acres of land. And that is what led to the Indian Institute of Science being established in Bangalore. And that had so many cumulative effects. You had the HAL and ISRO and all of that coming, and the IT thing was a natural follower. So for a dynasty like this, which had catapulted modern Karnataka, laid the foundations of a very cosmopolitan, egalitarian society that we in Karnataka are so proud of, to not have a book about them, to not have information and castigate the royal family, the kind of troubles they have gone through with the state governments, right from 1970 with the abolition of the privy purses and all of that. It's a tale in itself. It's a very, very sad tale that for all that they have done, this is the thing in return we are doing to them. So that's when I decided to write my first book, in 2008. It came serendipitously. Splendors of Royal Mysore, the untold story of the Wadiyars. It was untold because nobody cared to tell it so far. I thought it's a one-book wonder. I'll go back to my job. But destiny had other plans, and this is my 10th book now after that, after 17 years. But this particular period, the 40-year period, which is the Interregnum, and that's not inspired by the person who's given the endorsement, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, to use some high-sounding word which no one can understand or pronounce. But Interregnum is an interval or an intermission where a normal government is displaced and a usurpation occurs. So just these 40 years, 1760 to 1799, not even 40, 39 years, is all that this book covers. But I think that period was so fascinating. It was so interesting because tumultuous, and also put Mysore in the national map, a small province which had nothing to do with larger national importance. It took the British 30 years to conquer this province. And it was in all ways probably one of the last bastions of resistance for the British. And Sir Richard Wellesley, who led the last war, he is rightly called the father of the British Empire, because after that the foundations of the empire were laid.
Because everybody had finished. The Mughals, Marathas
Marathas were
fallen.
weakened. Only maybe the Sikhs later, the Ranjit Singh, but that was somewhere far, in north and northwest. The rest of India, Bengal had fallen, Awadh had gone, the central provinces, the Nizam was a vassal. So Mysore was the main bastion. So even then, I wanted to do a book on this, and I was really fascinated by these two father and son characters,
Hyder Ali
and Tipu. And I was 26, 27 when that book came, and
when the serial came.
No, when the book came.
Oh.
When the serial came, I was 12 years. So I
Which book are you talking about?
Splendors of Royal Mysore.
Splendor. Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah. And after 10 years of research, when the book came in, when I was 26, 27, there were lots of lectures people would call me for. And I really didn't know that history is a landmine with so many sharks. I was literally a babe in the woods. So there were so many lectures, and one lecture was on the Interregnum period, and that was at a very prestigious place in Bangalore. And I'd gone there, and I was just reading out some of the letters that Tipu himself had written. I was not adding my own interpretation to it. His own words, his master's voice, where he says, "Go to Calicut, destroy these temples," and gloats that I have converted 4 lakh infidels or kafirs to Islam. I was just reading that. And an otherwise civilized looking audience, a section of that just broke out in protests. Paper rockets were made and hurled at the podium. They shouted me down. And the harried organizers, they didn't want more trouble. And so they quickly aborted the program and took me off backstage. The program ended. In fact, the next morning, I think in the Deccan Herald and all, there was like sparks fly at the Tipu event and all that came. Now, all that happened, but I exposed in the process my poor father, who was sitting in the first row. Somebody in the audience, some Tipu fan club or some such organization, went and thrust a pamphlet in his hand and also told him that, you have an only son, and if you want him to live long, please ask him to mind what he talks and writes.
When you write in this, the aggression of that evening stunned us deeply, impacting my mother's already precarious health. In our naivety, we believed that historiography meant telling the truth, as it were, but its intense socio-political weaponization was something that we were both unaware of and yet to be confronted with.
Yes.
For audience and viewers, if you have not seen some of my podcasts with authors, this is just one thing that I do. I'll read out extracts from the book as Vikram is explaining some of the events that he's written in his book. Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
Vikram.
So this happened that night. Obviously, my mother was actually unwell that night, and my father went back and complained, "Look at what he's doing!" And there was such a huge commotion at home. And my bad luck, I think 2 weeks later, I'd written a piece again in the Deccan Herald on the Dewans of Mysore, and it started with Purnaya, the first Dewan, and there was some references to Tipu in that. Purnaya's own niece was found in the harem of Tipu, and she was supposed to have been raped by some of the soldiers when she was going for a bath in the Kaveri. And then Purnaya protests, and he says, anyway, she's, been violated, so let me take her into the harem. And there was another instance where in the court, he tells Purnaya that you're such an intelligent man, so why don't you join us and convert to Islam? This guy was a very diplomatic Madhva Brahmin. So he quickly said, "Haan, ji huzur," and quickly runs away from the court. And his mother comes out, and Tipu's mother comes out from the parda and chides her son, saying, "Your father never did this. If you are going on this dangerous path, and you lose the support of all the people, the Hindus particularly, and your end is near." So these were some of the facts which are recorded in history, documented with sources and references as I give. I had just written this in that article. I don't know what came. There was some, Dalit and Hindulida Varga and some Alpasankhyata, some group which congregated in front of the Deccan Herald office shouting slogans and all of that. And the editor actually called me and said, "They're protesting. They want your apology." I said, "No, over my dead body, why should I give an apology? Whatever I've said is based on facts." And the editor was actually willing to give them double the space that was given to me to put their point of view. But obviously, these were not the kinds who would read and write if you're protesting like that. So they had to do something to show their worth. So I think they got something and made an effigy and burnt my effigy in MG Road in Bangalore, in the heart of the city. The editor, of course, sent me a photograph of which I made my Orkut profile picture. Those days, nazar chali gayi, it's good that way. But obviously my mother didn't take it well. She really, it affected her health all the more. And she said, "You are going to promise me from now on that you're never going to talk about this horrible man in future, anywhere." And I had to comply because her health was more important, and I kept it up. I've never, after that was the last, I think I've never spoken, written, done anything on Tipu, because this caused so much of upheaval at home. And for parents, they don't deserve this.
Yeah.
And we don't come from any political family. None of us have political ambition. So why should we go through all this? In fact, even Savarkar, she was quite worried. Even that book came only after she passed away. So she passed away in 2018. And since then, this book was, my wicked brain was
Germinating.
I said, if you make a promise to someone and that person is only not here, then the promise is also dead.
She's watching right
She's watching,
now.
but I just hope wherever she
Amma,
is,
say sorry.
sorry, but protect me if some more loonies and crazies come.
I get that.
And, there's a lot of, even now my father was so worried about this, don't talk too much about anti or pro or anything, just steer clear of politicians and politics.
Has he read the book?
No way in hell. Not at all, I don't think.
Because you've documented some crazy stuff, which is like scary. Even when I was reading it, it's gory.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff that happened, and it's really weird that so much of it was documented.
Yes.
Every single thing.
Forget others. He was himself documenting almost every day of his life, including his dreams.
Yeah.
So there's no space for ambiguity. I don't understand where all this thing comes. Okay, the British have villainized him as a despot and a tyrant. Arey Baba, he's writing it himself.
But then even for you to write this also, as S.L. Bhairappa says in there, that he also spoke about it in the foreword he's written.
Yes.
That there are historical truths, and he mentions about that there are plenty of truths. There is historical truth and there's a political truth, and you hide history for political reasons, and then you teach history with a political motive in mind. And of course, he talks about Marxist historians who've suppressed the truth. You've often said that can't keep doing that. You
Yeah.
can't keep villainizing certain group of historians. Come up with
Alternative
an
scholarship.
alternative. Yeah, our earlier conversation has been about that. But so you decide to write this book, and how long did it take you to research this?
About 4-5 years it's been brewing, and since I know the sources, after all 10 years that I put into the splendors of Mysore book, the sources I was aware of, but I think I took a revisiting of even my own work, my own sources, went to archives across India, also in London, the British Library, which has copious amounts on Tipu. I think the British were fascinated by him. They feared him, they were also fascinated. And after his death, to kind of demystify him, to understand, a lot of it was confirmation bias that they wanted to, reinforce.
For the French, against the French.
Against the French, all of that, all his letters, everything they got translated. So I also tried to learn a bit of Persian, which ended in some kind of disaster. But I think some working knowledge I got of.
So you're talking about a whole bunch of historical material written by the Brits, written by French, that you accessed in London, and
Paris.
Tipu's.
Yeah, and Tipu's own writing. I mean,
why are they in London? Explain that to our viewers and listeners.
Well, after the fall of Srirangapatna in 1799, I think, as I said, the British were curious to know what was going on in this man's head, and whom was he talking to, what was his daily life like, what did he do every day, and that tiger toy that he had, that also fascinated them. Everything about him, his that octagonal throne that he had, which never got finished, that also they shipped it back. Most of it is there at the British Museum or the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And copious amount of translations happened. William Kirkpatrick, who translated, he was a Persian scholar too, and he learned that. And people raise objections even to that, especially post-colonial scholars. They say, Kirkpatrick, he has his own biased mind. Another scholar of recent times, Narsinga Seal, he mentions very clearly that, okay, there are annotations to what Kirkpatrick has translated. But if you look at the hermeneutics or the actual schema of translation, he adheres to that. He translates it as is. He gives an explanation in a footnote or an appendix or so on, which you can dismiss as being exaggerated. The actual words are what they are. And when you look at the original sources, it confirms that what he or other Brits translated, it was with fidelity to the original. And I think that fascination for Tipu also translated into works of art that came up in London. Mather Brown and Robert Porter, all these people made these fascinating paintings, which I have reproduced in the book as well, of Tipu handing over his sons as hostages to Cornwallis, and the siege of Srirangapatna, the way his body was discovered, the search party which goes to search for his body, and also his sons and everyone leaving, and as they're sent off to Vellore, all these by a group of painters who never visited India. They interviewed the people who were victorious in the last war, tried to figure out how Srirangapatna might have looked, everything, including how the fort looks, how the Ranganatha Swami temple, Gopuram, you see, all that is there in the paintings. So paintings which, the booklets that were made to explain that, those paintings, they sold in lakhs, and I believe they went on reprint every few weeks. That was the kind of inquisitiveness and curiosity that Tipu and Mysore invoked in the British population too. And so they were quite fascinated. Obviously they were gloating that we have killed this man and taken over his kingdom. But with that also came a sense of pathos for what happened to him, his family.
And who was he?
Who was he? What was he thinking about?
Yeah.
Why was he so much against us? So they produced a whole lot of scholarship which is still there. The translations, the originals, the dream registers. So every night he would have these vivid dreams, and next morning I believe he would sit in his toilet for 2 hours and note down all that he saw the previous night. So
what is this bizarre thing about dreams? Why? What do you think was happening in his mind? Was it just a very, you psychoanalyzed it also, you said, right?
Yeah, I actually took it to a psychiatrist and showed it, because I think dreams are an index of your subconscious mind, what you're thinking constantly about. And the opinion I got was, here was a man who was so full of uncertainty, so consumed by hatred, almost, self-combusting by hatred and toxicity. All his dreams talk about, some suddenly an angel will appear or Prophet Muhammad will appear and tell, go this far, break that temple, break this church. The Nazarenes, as he calls the Christians, go and do this and that to them. Suddenly there is a man whom he sees, a very beautiful young man. Then when he goes and talks to him, she turns around and it turns into a woman, and he analyzes it after getting up that this man turned woman is actually the Marathas, and they're so effeminate, and so he's also dreaming that I will make them so emasculated. I'll conquer them. The Raja of Travancore appears as some six-legged cow or something like that, very bizarre creature whose legs he cuts off. So he's also constantly wishing and hoping that he will annihilate all his opponents.
Which he was showing these tendencies even as a preteen.
Yes.
He was vicious as
Yes.
a kid. So before we go into his childhood, it's necessary to go into understand his father, because this father-son relationship forms a major part of your book. And in fact, Hyder Ali, you talk a lot about Hyder Ali in your book. I mean, at first, the first 300 pages, you don't even come to Tipu. You're still on Hyder Ali, and why? And then first I was wondering, why have you talked so much about him? Then I realized, to understand Tipu, you need to know about his
Correct.
about his father and what made Tipu the man
Correct.
he was. So let's start with him, because they are so radically different from
Yes.
each other, and yet there are a lot of similarities.
Correct. Yeah.
So explain to me about Hyder.
So along with Hyder, I think I've also posited him in the larger politics of the time. The 18th century, which was, I think, a time of intense chaos, political flux all over the country. Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj had, of course, in the previous century died. Sambhaji had been captured. The Maratha Empire, the Peshwas had still not become powerful. It was still in the formation. With Aurangzeb's death, the Mughal Empire was slowly disintegrating. All these small satraps, Awadh, Bengal, Hyderabad, all, declaring their autonomy and independence. And at that time, you had the wars of succession in the Deccan, both in Arcot and in Hyderabad. And the British and the French, entangling themselves, their rivalry back in Europe playing out in the politics of South India in the form of the Carnatic Wars, people like Dupleix and Robert Clive and everyone coming into the picture. And at the time when the British was slowly, step by step, ascending. They were a horrible military power before. Even during the time of Hyder and Tipu, they just couldn't get their act together till almost probably the 1790s. Cornwallis and Wellesley. So in that larger milieu is where I posit Hyder as this young boy who was born to a army commander of the Nawab of Sira, this man called Fateh Muhammad. And quite ominously, when he's born, the astrologers predict that he will ensure his father dies. And so all of them suggest that please give the baby poisoned milk so that it is killed and your life is saved. And Fateh Muhammad actually rejects that and lets the baby live. But quite perversely, that prediction comes true. When the child is about 3 or 4 years old, Fateh Muhammad is killed in a battle, and he owes a lot of debt to this man called Abbas Quli Khan. And to get that, Abbas Quli Khan comes and plunders Fateh Muhammad's home, all the treasures, everything is taken over. And to further compound the insult and the injury, these two young boys, Hyder, who's 4, and his elder brother Shahbaz, who's 8, they are put inside a kettle drum or a nagada and beaten on till they actually faint and so on. So at that time, his mother, this lady called Majida Begum, she rushes all the way to Srirangapatna, where I think Hyder's nephew was employed with the Maharaja of Mysore, and she pleads for mercy with the Maharaja, saying, my fatherless children, please save their lives. The Maharaja then takes pity and pays off the debtors and releases these boys. And they were 4 and 8 at that time. He also promises that once they come of age, we will enlist them into the Mysore army. Little did he know what was going to, await him for this work of benevolence. These boys, of course, Hyder, his childhood was so troubled. I think the trauma of losing his father, and that revenge, that vengefulness. So one of the first things he does after capturing power is to go and attack Abbas Quli Khan in Doddaballapur and, finish him off, because I think that revenge was brewing in him for 20, 30 years. In the process, an indolent, very, very kind of feisty childhood, no education, given to all kinds of addictions, drinking and so on. But he comes into the army in 1749 in the siege of Devanhalli near Bangalore. And there he's...
Near the airport place.
Near the airport.
The famed airport that never will be.
Which is so far from the rest of the city. So in that siege, he makes his appearance, and he immediately catches the eye, Hyder, of Nanjarajaya, who is one of the commanders, Dalavai of the Maharaja. And the Wadiyars had themselves to blame at this time, because, the polity was, the king had become weak, and everything was handed over to these two brothers, Devrajaya and Nanjarajaya, who were the Dalavai brothers. They had captured all power, corrupt to the core, embezzlement of funds, palace intrigues and coups, and the Maharanis participating. It was a mess, holy mess. And Nanjarajaya was actually the Maharaja Immadi Krishnaja Wadiyar's father-in-law. And despite that, he tries to go and assassinate the Maharaja. And his own daughter, who's the queen's wife, who is pregnant at that time, comes and stands as a wall between her father and husband and say, over my dead body you can kill my husband, and she faints. And so all this drama is going on, and in the middle of all this politics of the south which he's participating and the drama in the palace, look at this man, the cold, calculated, Machiavellian spirit that he had to run with the hare, hunt with the hounds, make very strategic moves and alliances. In 12 years, from 1749 to 1760, 11, 12 years, he is able to overthrow the benefactor who actually saved his life as a child,
the Mysore Maharaja,
and become a Sarvadhikari, or the supreme commander. And that also, there is so much drama there. So one of his associates called Khande Rao, he is left behind in Srirangapatna. Well, Hyder slowly, ascends the ladder of fame. After that Devanhalli siege, he shows promise. He gets larger part of the province as a Faujdar in Dindigal and other places. There he starts building his own little army with the French help. He's quite impressed with what the French did. So he starts collecting money, loot money and all of that, and starts building his small little fiefdom. And he'd left his, accountant in Srirangapatna, the capital, Khande Rao, and Khande Rao starts conspiring with the royal family to overthrow Hyder, and they come very, very close to actually doing it. And there too, destiny chose
royal family of
Mysore royal family.
Okay, but Khande Rao, I thought Maratha.
No. He was a Maratha Brahmin who was, the Maratha Brahmins were very much part of the Mysore firmament. In fact, the accounts were kept in both Kannada and Marathi, which Tipu later, threw both the languages out and started having the accounts in Persian, which didn't make sense to anybody who was there. So Khande Rao starts conspiring and using his Marathi links. I think they also write to the Peshwa to come and assist them in this palace coup to get rid of Hyder. But there also, destiny's chosen child, the day they were actually going to probably kill him or evict him out of this kingdom, that's when the Battle of Panipat happens. And the Marathas themselves are vanquished in 1761, and immediately the Peshwa calls all the consignments back from wherever they are to assemble in Pune. And so it's an unequal battle then between Khande Rao and Hyder, and he manages to come and take over whatever is there. And that too is a drama. The scene in court where Hyder says, I'm willing to go away. I have a lot of dues to be paid, salaries and so many things that I've done for the kingdom. Pay that, I will go and take service in our court or somewhere else. Now, so pitiable was the condition of the Maharaja of Mysore that the treasury was depleted. He couldn't even actually pay the arrears away and send him off. So in return, there's a Kararnama that is signed where he becomes the supreme dictator. All the revenue of the kingdom then has to go to him. The king is pensioned off and kept as a little stipend given for his upkeep. And the ladies of the royal family, they are weeping in that court, and they say, Khande Rao was such a great friend of ours, he helped us, please treat him with care. And this guy haughtily says, I will treat him as beautifully and lovingly as I treat my parrot. And little did they know that he would actually keep up his word literally, where he's actually kept in an iron cage like a parrot for the rest of his life in the bazaar of Bangalore, fed only rice and milk for the rest of his life. He dies in that cage. His bones apparently were seen there for decades after, even through the 1780s and so on. People in Bangalore would go there, people would mock at him and so on. So that's how Khanderao met his sad end for
So
what
the
he...
brutality that
Brutality.
later one sees with Tipu Sultan, that brutality was there in his dad too.
Yeah.
Though maybe it was common to all
Yes.
rulers.
Kingship those days was...
Kingship was because you needed to send a message to everybody that you're the supreme,
Correct.
and also to Hyder Ali because he didn't inherit a kingdom, he didn't
Yeah.
inherit his kingship.
Yeah.
So he needed to say that I can be brutal and cruel
And
as
take over.
as much as a king.
Yes.
So you better toe my.
Correct.
Could that be the reason?
Very much,
Yeah.
very much. And that inferiority also comes through so many times because in the army he was the, at the level of Nayak, Subedar Nayak or
Yeah.
whatever. So people would, Banni Nayak re, so purposely to make him feel,
That
small,
you're not a sultan.
Not a sultan or of royal descent or something. Especially the
Hyderabadi Nizams and all would not give him the time of day.
time or matrimonial alliances that he tried to forge with them. I would always say you're of lesser, origin, though you're a Muslim. And even these Dalwai brothers, Devraj and Nanjaraj, they used to call him Banni Naikare, Banni Naikare. So he actually used his good offices with the Maharaja and got a proclamation, out that anyone who calls me Nayak, his tongue should be cut off. And though this proclamation obviously didn't make its way to everybody in the kingdom so quickly. The very next day of the proclamation coming, some poor peon or someone called him Naikre, and the poor guy had his tongue cut off because he didn't actually know. So it shows the deep sense of inferiority and that seeking for validation, legitimacy that he always sought.
So you've written also in this when you were documenting about the guy wasn't born to royalty, but he adopted this nouveau riche qualities pretty soon, huh?
Yeah.
So he says between what you've written is, you're such a great storyteller, Vikram. Between
you.
8 a.m. to 9 a.m., he departed from his palace, gave audience to his secretaries in an assembly. Or one can actually imagine while you're writing about this. He met his sons, friends, relatives. Then he appears on this balcony next. He receives this salute of elephants and horses. Next, tigers pass by, led by the hand, and were fed by him with sweets. What was he giving mithai to tigers?
Mysore Pak.
Mysore Pak. Okay, this is for Vikram and not for the tigers. And they were wearing green and gold mantles, bonnet in their head of what? What were these doing? What was he doing with these two? And what was he doing with all this? With the tigers marching along with the elephants?
Some kind of medieval fantasies must be of royalty. And this assertion, I think everywhere that assertion. And after taking over the kingdom, so he starts, the first thing he does is, I want to conquer a kingdom of my own. And that's how he goes and invades Bidanur. Bidanur, which is the Kannada, Shimoga part of today's Karnataka, Shivamogga. So that part, which was so fertile, so prosperous, he gets several, Wilkes writes that almost several million sterling pounds that he gets out of the treasury there. That becomes, he calls that his Swarajya. So, something that he conquered and got it of his own. So while in Mysore, so Hyder that way was such a smart man, he knew that he was a usurper and the people would not take it lightly.
And he was illiterate.
Illiterate and still smart. I think that shows that education does nothing
Spoke
to...
several languages.
In Hindustani, Kannada, Tamil, Telugu, Marathi.
Smattering of French probably.
French, English little bit. But the only literary achievement of his life was to learn to sign the first alphabet of his name. Which also he would like, I can sign this and do this. So Bidanur, that is where he starts minting his own Haidari pagodas, his own coins. But there also he is very careful. He knows it's a Hindu province which he has captured, a Hindu monarch who had saved him. So the people who were a Hindu majority would not like this. So he kept that Wadiyar as a puppet on the throne. He was allowed to do what he wanted to do. All the trophies of war would be gone and submitted to the Maharaja's feet. Oh, I am but your humble servant. And proclamations and farmans would come in the Maharaja's name. But it was no secret for anybody as to where the true power lay. And the Maharaja too, after Immadi Krishna Raj Wadiyar died, his son, etc., Nanjaraj Wadiyar, Betta the Chamaraj, all these people come on to the throne. By the time they come of age, or they get to be a thinking mind of their own, quite surreptitiously a glass of milk goes to their chambers, and next morning they are found dead, and when investigated, it is Hyder who's got the milk poisoned. And then an infant is placed on the throne till the time the infant comes of age, and he starts sending any ruler would feel suffocated that he can't do anything and he's just a Raja in the name of it. So
from then probably the myth or the legend that sons don't live long.
Yes, actually.
Probably because of that
you had to adopt
that male heir.
Male heir, Alamelamma's curse, which is spoken about.
So who knows? It's probably
it
because of that.
It is that only. And this period was when all this crisscross genealogies happened. And that's attributed to a 1610 curse of this lady called Rani Alamelamma to Raja Wadiyar, where she had that famous 3-line curse, Talakadu, Maralagi, Malingi, Maduagi, Mysuru, Doregalige, Makkalagadiraali. And then he propitiates her, and it is let them be childless becomes alternative generations childless. I don't know what that helps in. but
childless, matlab, this could also be that he was going about killing
people. Yeah,
all
killing
the male children.
Correct. And so and in that also puts this Maharani Lakshmi Ammani in seclusion, and she's still in that very troubled circumstance where in front of her adopted kids are being killed. Her husband has died. She becomes a widow at the age of 24. And look at her grit. Anyone else would have just collapsed, and this lady was made of sterner stuff, and she continues to send emissaries through the Mysore Pradhans, two Iyengars, Tirumal Rao and Narayan Rao, who take her emissaries all the way to messages to Madras, to the British. That also, I mean, especially under Tipu, she is just secluded to the Zanana, and the only outing she could have in the day was to go to her favorite Kille Venkatramana temple in the palace. And in the puja thali, she would hide those letters and go and take it there. And the pujari and she had a pact, and so with a sleight of hand and a wink or whatever, they would exchange this letter, and that letter would then make its way to Madras through these pradhans.
So he had Islamic practices forced upon the royal family of Zanana?
Not at all. So Hyder that way, not only the royal family, but even on the populace of Mysore. So Dasara was allowed to be celebrated. You have eyewitness accounts of how it was. And there are so many occasions. So as I said, he was very sure, clear in his mind that if he upset that part of it, removed the Wadiyar or removed the Hindu-ness of the kingdom, his kingdom would collapse. And so for him, the end mattered, the power mattered, what faith who followed, and that was their personal issue. He himself was not a very devout Muslim.
Which is what he pulled up his son for doing this. So Hyder from his, I'm reading out, Hyder from his earliest youth of Tipu made no secret of lamenting that his intellect, that is Tipu's intellect, was of inferior order and his disposition wantonly cruel, deceitful, vicious and intractable. Because Tipu was taking delight in hunting sacred bulls of Hindu temples, wounding them and sometimes destroying them with his lance. He abused his son in grossest terms, put him in solitary confinement, and forbade the courtiers to speak with him when he was released. So, Tipu has no such notions. He goes about even before he can ascend the throne. Throne bole to matlab before his father died. Before he could do that, he had already started showing this viciousness, which Hyder didn't show towards the population.
Correct. And in fact, so since he was uneducated, he wanted his sons to get the best of education, Tipu and his younger brother Karim. So, but he didn't know how to educate them. So some Maulvi, someone was called to teach them. And the poor man, he didn't even know what they were learning. So 2-3 years later, he just did a surprise mock examination to see what they have learned. And he was aghast, and his temper, he loses it after he hears. And he admonishes that Maulvi and says, if this is what, the seeds of bigotry are sown in my son's head, he will grow up to become a good mullah but not a good ruler. And he's going to squander away all that I have built. Duba dega my sultanate. And all the hard work that I have done, it can go in a jiffy, because this guy has, of course, no tact and wisdom, but also coupled with bigotry, then it's going to be tough. So he dismisses that Maulvi and puts some other, trainers. But I think quite early in life that seed was well, planted in Tipu's mind. But Hyder, as I said, outside, Bidnur was the place which he first conquers, again by deceit and all of that. There also the coins on the one hand had, images of Shiva and Parvati and all that, because it was like though it was called Hydari pagodas, it still had, he wanted to,
Iconoclastic. Okay, Hindu.
Hindu
thing.
iconography had to be respected. And there's that other interesting anecdote where, in front, the Ranganatha Swami temple takes this Rathotsava and takes the Utsav Murti for a procession. And while the procession is going, it crosses a Islamic seminary, and the Pirzada, who's there, a very famous guy, he and his students, like it happens now, come and start throwing stones at the at the procession. The first day the Hindus are outwitted. The next day they group themselves again, regroup, come with clubs and arrows and this, that, and fight their way through, and the procession manages to go past. And the Pirzada is incensed. He rushes to Hyder and complains, and Hyder listens to the whole thing and said, "Who cast the first stone?" And he said, "We." So he said, "Then how can you not expect the other side to retaliate?" He said, "But how can they do this? I mean, how can idolatry be practiced in a Muslim kingdom?" He said, "Who told you this is an Islamic kingdom? I am but a slave of the Maharaja." So the Hindu ruler. So he says, "Then I'm not going to stay in this kingdom." He said, "Be my guest, you go where you want." And he goes away to Madras. He doesn't like it. He wants to come back, and he's never allowed to come back into the kingdom. So this guy knew, he was so tactful. And as I said, not a devout Muslim. He did everything that Islam maybe forbade. He drank so much, lewd and bawdy jokes that he cracked with his male buddies all the time. Also supremely scared of his wife, who had an acerbic tongue.
That is Tipu's mother.
Tipu's mother, Fatima.
In fact, there is one part where he says that if she had not been as acerbic, he would have probably not been what he was. Like, right? I mean,
he would go trembling apparently to her chambers, and she would whiplash and tongue lash him with her.
Tipu knew that this is what his mother was all about.
Yeah, and he was also completely under her, control. Even she decided whom he was to marry. The girl she chose. Hyder had another choice, but the mother prevailed, and so the first wife was someone that the mother chose.
Yeah, but he had a zillion wives and concubines.
Yeah, he married both.
4,000 is what you have listed, concubines.
Correct. Yeah, both father and son together. Yeah.
4,000 women inside the harem?
Across, no, they were divided across Mysore.
Different.
Yeah, every time they go to Chitradurga, Bangalore, Srirangapatnam.
So, a harem in each port?
In each port, yeah.
Yeah, sounds ghastly. Okay.
So when he would go and she would give him this tongue lash, he would come back, so scared, Hyder, running out of his wife's chamber. And his male buddies would catch him, and then they would all go and drink. And in his drunken revelry, he would say, "It's so much easier to face the British sword than my wife's tongue." And so I think this lady was quite a strong, gritty woman who even controlled the husband, who gave shivers to the East India Company, and also her son, whom she tried to, give sane advice, which he never took.
He didn't. Yeah. In fact, when he gets the kingdom, this emotional letter that you have listed in the form of a will that Hyder had left for his son. I'm going to read out some while you can have your idli or coffee. It says, it's kind of heart-tugging actually, Yeah. "My son, I leave you an empire which I have not received from my ancestors. A scepter acquired by violence is always fragile. Meanwhile, you will not find any obstacles in your family. You have no rivals among the chiefs of the army. I do not leave you any enemies among my subjects." He goes on to write more and then says, "Now this is strange. India, since the death of Aurangzeb, has lost her rank among the empires of Asia. This fair land is parcelled out into provinces which make war, one against the other, and the people, divided into multitude of sects, have lost their love of the country. The Hindus, mollified by their pacific maxims, if you please, this is not Shashi Tharoor writing, are little able to defend their country, which has become the prey of strangers. The Musalmans are more united and more enterprising than the feeble Hindus. It is to them that should belong the glory of saving Hindustan." So takes it upon himself and bequeaths to his son the responsibility of the Muslims to protect and preserve India as it was, because the Hindus are too feeble.
Correct. But the authenticity of that letter itself.
Which you say this, that why is this letter suspect, is that the British records talk about Hyder instructing Tipu and Purania not too much to rely because of the French. Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So some say it's a concoction of the French, because on one hand, the British records say he left a will saying don't trust the French. The French say all this. This was actually Michaud, one of the French historians, who quotes this letter. So authenticity is not there, but the father-son dynamic was fraught with so much of
For all these
uncertainty.
Western powers who turn around and say, don't bring your ethnic conflicts to our country,
Yeah.
they brought their ethnic conflicts to our country, right?
Entirely.
Yeah. So this is a proof of that also. This one little, mingly little proof, but their proof that we still don't know which is the right letter, whether
Or
the one that
there was one at all.
if there was one at all, whether the one the French wrote or the Brits.
I forget the will. Certainly, what the British found in his palace after Tipu died was a agreement that he signed for his father, which had about 8 articles, which said, if I'm found stealing something, then I can be flogged. If I'm found, doing idle talk, then some other punishment.
Yeah.
From petty crimes to also, insurrection against the Sarkar. So that means he just didn't trust his son at all.
That sounded a little bit like my era, but not my dad, but, in those write 100 words on
imposition.
If you pull the pigtails of your sister, now write 100 words on what you will not do to your sister, how you will not harm her. Next time you will learn the 8 times table and not make, it sounds like that.
Yeah,
It sounds very credible sometimes.
I know. And in the middle of the war, when he was 21 years old, not a child, the battle of Chinkurli against the Marathas, in the middle of the battle, this guy says something intemperate, Tipu, and the father snatches a cane from someone and whacks him on his posterior, so hard. And Tipu is in front of everyone, and that is an insult. So he loses his school. He throws a 20-year-old man. So he throws his turban and dashes his sword and said, "To hell with you and your war. I'm not going to participate in it anymore." That also, the psychoanalysis that the person helped me with. If you see, most of the dictators, they had a very terrible father. They were father wounds, corporal punishments that the father gave. Somewhere instill that sense of, you're wounded yourself as a child, and you don't brook any kind of, dissent, any mistake anyone else does is meted out the worst of punishments. So somewhere this cruelty that Tipu was wantonly cruel, no doubt about that. So that cruelty probably came from these father wounds, because the father never, there were occasions where he did very well in the battle, the first Anglo-Mysore war, the second Anglo-Mysore war. He would feel very happy, even when that, he says, "To hell with you," and goes away. Later, he's found missing, for several days. And Hyder then goes back to Srirangapatna. He's crying at the mausoleum of his, one of the saints there, and says, God gave him and God has taken him back, and so on. And when he comes back, he's so overjoyed. Obviously, that love for the son is there. But at the same time, I think he didn't think too highly of his tact and wisdom. And so he would always keep comparing him to others. There was a Sheikh Ayaz, who was a convert from Malabar. He almost thought that he's a better successor. We'll divide the kingdom between Tipu, Sheikh Ayaz and Karim. And Karim was born of a lot of mental infirmity and so on. So he was really not the king material at all, not even a commander material. And there was another guy called Muhammad Ali, whom he had almost adopted as his son. So I look at this young boy who's growing up, first of all, having a bigotry sown in his mind quite early in life.
By the tutor.
A very, very controlling mother who can give shivers to a otherwise despotic father. And probably that frustration the father is showing out on the son through all these punishments, and constantly comparing him to others, saying,
Sharma ji ka beta.
So what will he grow up to become? So one becomes a Tipu Sultan.
Yeah, but the perversion is mind blowing. One has read about it and things, but you go into
Gory
such so let's start with the Mandya Mayangars. Let's talk about Naraka Chaturdashi and that.
So Hyder dies in the middle of the war, Second Anglo-Mysore War in 1782, and after that there is a kind of attempt at an internal coup, which he and actually Purnaya very ably manages and tries to ensure that nothing happens. In fact, when he dies in the middle of the war, it is Purnaya who was such a close confidant that he kept the news of Hyder's death a complete secret, because that could have upset, we are right in the middle of a bloody battle with the British. So large chests of treasures would come to Hyder's war camp, ostensibly as if they've been brought from the Caliph from Constantinople. And in one of those large chests, his dead body was also put and taken back to Srirangapatna, because at that time Tipu was awake trying to quell a rebellion in Malabar, which was a thorn in the flesh of both father and son.
Yeah.
And so, despite all this, he somehow there are hints that even Karim tried to assert himself. That otherwise very sissy kind of person. He also tries to assert, but that is also quelled. And at that time, there is an internal rebellion from the royalists, maybe Lakshmi Ammani, though she manages to do all these conspiracies without even her name coming out. In fact, Mark Wilkes, who goes and interviews her after Tipu's death and so on, she's still alive then, he says, I tried to poke so much and get so much out of her, but this lady would not even open her, her lips are sealed, nothing, no. And the needle of suspicion would never go to her. But probably she was the one who was engineering all of this. So they were a group of people, Anche Shamayya, who was a very trusted, Iyengar courtier of Hyder. All these people want to, instigate a rebellion, a palace coup. But sadly for them, the secret is out overnight. And so at that time, Tipu is in the middle of the Second Anglo-Mysore War, trying to conclude it. Mangalore has been sieged. And the British there are put to the worst of tortures. They're reduced to literally eating rodents and all to stay alive. He intercepts all the supplies, the provisions that are coming either from Bombay or Madras. And at such a time, in the palace, this coup is happening. And he assumes that this is at the behest of all these people, Anche Shamayya. And his nephews are these people, Tirumal Rao and Narayan Rao, who were the Mysore Pradhans, who, took the messages of the Rani to Madras. He tries, of course, Anche Shamayya, all of them are caught and they are executed and all of that. Tirumal Rao and Narayan Rao somehow give a slip and run away to various places. They are temporarily imprisoned, but they somehow find a way out and they manage to go away to the Carnatic region. So since you could not capture the two Iyengar brothers, the wrath of the ruler falls on the entire community of the Mandya Mayangars, who had nothing to do with this whole thing. And these were the Mandya Mayangars who belonged to this Bharadwaj Gotra, someone who came from that lineage, associated very closely with Ramanujacharya when he came all the way to Melkote, when he was persecuted in Tamil Nadu. Now these people, 700 of them, men, women and children, were, according to one story, it is oral history, it's not documented elsewhere, it's references to 700 people being killed are there in the Maharani's letters, but Wilkes and Hayavardhan Rao and all these historians don't talk about it, which is quite strange. So 700 people, he's supposed to have asked them to come for a feast at the Lakshmi Narasimha temple in Srirangapatna, and while on the eve of Diwali, on Narak Chaturdashi, and while they are in the middle of eating, the temple doors are closed and elephants are let loose to trample them, almost like what General Dyer did at Jallianwala Bagh, and those who tried to escape were brutally slaughtered. And that memory of that tragedy is there with that community even now after 230-40 years. This happened in 1784, November 1784, exactly. I don't know how many hundreds of years, but even now, when the rest of India celebrates Diwali, this community of Mandya Mayangars do not celebrate Diwali. They commemorate it as a day of mourning for their ancestors. So that kind of intergenerational trauma and memories that have lasted, that says something about how orally these memories are transmitted. Maybe 700 is wrong, maybe it was 70,
but
that
it happened.
That is immaterial.
It's oral history, but
correct.
if even till today that tradition continues, that means that it must have happened. Otherwise, why would they imagine?
And there's so many
such a
people
thing?
today who belong to that family, Smita, including, of course, some in Mandya and Melkote and Srirangpatna, but even people like Mrs. Tara Gandhi, she belongs to that group. Some long years back when I had spoken about this to her, she said, "Oh, is this the reason? I never knew that,
that we don't celebrate
we don't
Deepavali.
celebrate, but nobody told us why and so on." So, but it has come as a practice. Srinivasan Jain, your friend in the media, so he also supposedly belongs to this on the maternal side or whatever. And these are all the Mandya Mayangars. I don't know whether he celebrates Diwali at all this day or that day, but irrespective of that, so there are people who it's come almost axiomatically without knowing the reason as to why they do this.
Yeah. And the other one, since we are talking about how
Tortures.
Tipu used deception,
Yeah.
and I'll come to the Coorg part. That is another deception one. But let's talk about the Ash Wednesday,
Yes.
the massacre and that happened. 60,000 were made prisoners and dispatched. Yes, go ahead. Tell me that story.
So here in Mangalore, so the Second Anglo-Mysore War ends in Mangalore with the Treaty of Mangalore, which was probably the last document where an Indian power had an upper hand. So full credit to him for, ending that war with such a unpredictable victory. But, while that was being done, they realized that a lot of these Portuguese, bishops and others who were there in Mangalore, whom both Hyder had cultivated quite a bit and kept them. When the British attacked, they collaborated with their co-religionists, and so a lot of money was given to General Matthews, who attacked, Mangalore. So Tipu was very keen to take revenge on the bishops and the clergy of the Christians in Mangalore. Now these people somehow got to know about it. Quickly they hire a ship or something and run away to Goa, their main headquarters. The brunt of that again falls on the poor Kannada Christians. These were probably labourers, farmers, some petty workers here and there who had nothing to do with this deception. Just like the poor 700 or whatever number of Iyengars, they had nothing to do. Children couldn't have gone and made treachery against the Sultan. For the entire brunt of that falls on these people, and on Ash Wednesday of 1785, I think. There are varied numbers. Some say 60,000, some go up to 80,000. There are various. There's a Barkur manuscript, which is in Kannada, a very old manuscript, which talks about the same numbers.
Says, and I'm going to read out from this manuscript, which you've quoted here, about 60,000 Christians from South Kannada, which is Dakshina Kannada, 20,000 from North Kannada, who were holed up, were made to march on foot from there to Srirangapatna. Those captives who were rebellious and protested were indiscriminately hacked or thrown off the cliffs. The Netrakere, which means blood-filled lake. I would think. Kere is lake.
Yeah. Huh? You are the Mangalorean.
The Netrakere town en route derives its name as per popular oral history from the large pool of blood that was caused by the killing of Christians on their march to Srirangapatna. And before that, what happened was that they were killed. There were 7,000 Christians left behind in Mangalore. Yeah. Some of them today have their names of Kolyagars. If you're Konkani speaking and you don't know why your name is Kolyagar, Kole is dried leaves. And they were found aplenty in that region. And in the dry months, they would be kept in buttis. And they would go in baskets, and they would go under it, and they would hide so that they couldn't be caught by Tipu's army and circumcised and converted into Islam. The churches were dismantled.
27 of them.
27 churches. I'm going to come to the churches that were dismantled. They were in Mangalore, Bantwal, Mulki, Kundapura, Honnavar, and the Milagres Church. So Mangaloreans, those who go and see this Mangalore Milagres Church, something that I always do every time I'm there, it was rebuilt. It was, the horrors are just tremendous, which you say. They were, on the way, there were pregnant women who were forced to walk on this tortuous march. That is from Mangalore to Srirangapatna.
300 kilometers almost.
300 kilometers, they're made to walk. Pregnant women. Why he made them do this?
Exactly.
I just cannot understand. He could have just converted them in Mangalore and let them stay in Mangalore.
Yeah.
But no, he made them walk. And they're walking through mountainous terrain, through the
Yeah.
ghats.
Yeah.
And the pregnant women develop labor pains. Many of them had to deliver their babies on the side of the roads and resume their march thereafter. Some of the children were allowed, the babies were allowed to be carried. If the children were a burden, the only alternative was to abandon them on the way. Those who died were buried on the way. Most of the corpses with bare hands by the family members, only to be fed later by dogs and jackals. There was no burial given to them. These are Christians who went. To avoid all this, the family sometimes threw the body into the well or the lake on the way. That's why those keres
Yeah. Full of blood.
were full of blood. Now, when this whole Tipu Jayanti thing happened, the Mangalorean Christians were up in arms.
Yeah.
And there were people who were turning around and saying, why are Christians objecting? What
Yeah.
is your problem?
Yeah.
We can understand if Hindus. But this lived memory that people have of the atrocity of Tipu Sultan on the Christians of Mangalore. So sorry for interrupting your train of thought, which I
No,
was
I think
reading out.
you covered the entire thing. And so they were forced to come all the way to Srirangapatna, and then those who did not convert, their lips and noses would be cut off and they would be paraded on donkeys in Srirangapatna. Most of them, epidemics and pandemics broke out, diseases, cholera and smallpox, dysentery. And then they were all holed up in the dungeons where also the British prisoners were. And many of these are British.
In
Srirangapatna.
Those who survived that torturous journey.
And who didn't convert. So if you converted, then you would be let off or put into a Chela brigade, which Hyder had a Chela brigade of converts, and this man had an Ahmadi brigade, which was of converted Hindus and Christians who
They were
come into it.
castrated. That is also there.
Some young boys. I mean, he had this fetish for that also. Get a lot of young boys, eunuchs, and that I think was a very common this thing of a lot of Islamic rulers. Maybe eunuchs to guard the female.
The
There
concubines.
Zenana 4,000. This one, and Hyder was so possessive of the kind of what his women did. There's that even in the Darbar, if there's a dance program, apparently even if it's a beautiful dancer, all his friends and the other courtiers could not look at her, and everyone had to look at him and say how beautiful you are to Hyder. And the poor dancer also could not see anyone else. So there's one instance, Pixoto, who's a Portuguese, this one in his army, he talks about it that that poor dancer, by chance she managed to see or exchange a smile with one of the courtiers, so he was instantly she was stabbed and he was skinned alive. So this kind of
brutality. But Tipu inherited the harem of his dad.
Yeah, but I don't think Tipu had that kind of, I mean, he was not a womanizer. To that extent that the father was. The father was notorious for that. And I do narrate that also.
That soothsayers.
Dolu, Korvanji, who would go from village to village. She would go into homes and carry messages that, if there is a beautiful girl in some village, next day the armies are there and they pick the girl to the harem. So someone who was a, harbinger of fortune telling and all of that becomes a harbinger of great misery for a family. So that's also a part of this thing. But I don't think Tipu
did that. Okay.
There was no time, I guess, for him.
But there were other cruelties. Now let's go to the Coorg, the Kodava cruelty. Yeah, let's talk about that.
No, Coorg. So Coorg and Malabar, both these places I think were really, bastions of resistance for Mysore's invasion. Mysore was the imperialist here, what they accused the British of for the rest of India. And the Coorgis never gave up. Similarly in Kerala, the Nayars and the Thiyas later.
Yeah, let's talk about that also after the Coorg, then we'll go to the Kerala one. Yeah.
So in Coorg, you had a royal family and everywhere there's a war of succession or something. The Mysore gets involved, tries to play one against the other, and Hyder did that, somehow kept it in abeyance. And these were coastal areas or closer to the coast, So they the main idea to invade Malabar or Coorg was to gain a lot of port access to Honavar, Mangalore, and all these western coast, so that trade and the navy and other things could be accomplished there. But the Coorgis again fought back. They're a valorous, chivalrous group even
Martial
now.
race,
Martial race, and so they resisted. Hyder somehow managed to put.
How many chiefs from? I think 3 army chiefs. No.
Yes,
From
Karyappa and
yeah.
So Tipu, of course, so Hyder somehow managed some kind of semblance of peace there. But when it came to Tipu, I think there was a lot of uprisings. So he goes and captures the entire royal family. Veera Rajendra, who's put in prison along with his entire family, his sisters and everyone. And the Kodavas themselves are trying to resist this, and there again deception. So he calls a lot of them to this place called Devati Paramb, which is some hillock or something in Coorg, and there ostensibly to have
Bhagamandala.
Devati Paramb.
Okay.
Bhagamandala was the main the Bhagandeshwara temple that was there, which is where the Talakaveri and that region. But in Devati Param on 12th of December 1785, and so the Kodavas even now every year on 12th of December, I think they commemorate it as Martyrs' Day, because thousands of their people were called ostensibly for negotiations. They were told to come without arms, and once they got there, subterfuge, they were all captured and literally stabbed in the back, and then all their bodies thrown out. So a large massacre of their ancestors happened, and so that's why the Kodavas too, I think they hate Tipu Sultan with a vengeance. In fact, dogs in that place are called by the name Tipu even now, and that's a part of the folklore there. So many temples, the Bhagandeshwara temple, which was one of the main temples, that was also destroyed. And later, after doing all these atrocities, and he writes to his commander Zainul Abidin Shustri, who wrote this treatise called the Fathul Mujahideen. I mean, he all his wars, it typically had the name of jihad. It is a religious war, it is a holy war, and we are a ghazi or a religious warrior, and these are mujahideen. So what should a mujahideen do is that treatise, military treatise that Shustri wrote. And he's first sent to Coorg, but he's good in theory, not in practice. He's actually defeated and comes back. And later Tipu himself goes and does these atrocities and tries to teach them a lesson. And there are lots of practices there, including the polyandry, which he abuses them for. In Kerala, the matriarchal society, he abuses that. He almost dons this mantle of a social reformer to reform that society. So this royal family is put into the prison, and then he goes and to Shustri he writes that not only the Coorgis who are alive, the captive prisoners, even the dead must be converted.
He says it is the custom with you for the eldest of 5 brothers to marry, and for the wife of such a brother to be common to all 5. Hence there cannot be the slightest or the remotest doubt of you being all bastards and whore sons. And then he goes on to say that I will not revile or molest a single individual among you, but making Ahmadis, that is Muslims, of the whole of you, transplant you from this country or to some other, by which means, being illegitimate, your progeny or descendants may become legitimate. So he thinks that they are illegitimate because they are sons born out of a polyandry system. Polygamy was okay, polyandry was not okay. So he says that I will take you out of India or whatever and transport you somewhere so that your descendants become legitimate. And the epithet of whore sons, which is born of sinful mothers, may no longer belong to your tribe. So no respect for a tribal custom of polyandry or the matrilineal in the Malabar region that he had. Okay. And something which his father did not interfere with.
He did not bother much.
It is not documented.
The cruelty was there both in Coorg and Malabar. He sits there and says 5 rupees for every Nayar head, 5 rupees for every Coorgi head, and 3 rupees for every Nayar woman who's brought as a sex slave. And in Coorg, they say he's sitting there and counting heads. Some 600 heads have come, and he's ghoulishly sitting and distributing money for every head that is brought. And the Coorgis are also, fair skinned, some are very pretty. So a young boy whose head comes to him and he sees it and he says, such a pretty boy, let's stop this beheading thing. So if the pretty head had not come, he would have continued this one. So that cruelty was there in the father too, but this was an added thing of adding a religious bigotry element also. Convert the dead, dead bodies being circumcised and converted, like what sort of and then you're listing statistics. I have converted so many, I have done this, I have broken these many churches, temples.
What did he think, that he would go to Jannat because of the numbers that he had circumcised and converted?
Possibly. And the fact that he was using these
They were these dreams, right, he had. So
yeah.
This didn't trouble him that he was killing people so
Of course
ruthlessly?
not. They are kafirs. They have to be killed. They are the worst of creatures. His manifesto of 1786 clearly says that, this is the main motive of the Sarkar-e-Khudadad. He made Mysore an Islamic Sultanate.
Renamed all the cities.
All the cities, brought Persian as a court language. The coins had Persian on it. To a Kannada speaking population who could not probably understand what was there. Started his own calendar, the Maududi calendar, all these kind of almost Tughlaqi farmans that, he did there. But these atrocities, crimes, he wore them as a medal, as an honor, because he would use that to buttress his case. First with the Mughal and then with the Caliph, Ottoman Caliph, because he knew that his father was a usurper. Now, till the father was alive, he probably was the Sarvadhikari of the kingdom. But that was not a hereditary position which automatically passed on to the son as well. So he knew for a fact that he was illegitimate. All this legitimacy that he was talking of others' children, he knew he was an illegitimate ruler. So the constant quest for legitimacy, for acceptance, that we see even in the son. So he sends so many letters to
so why is
the Mughal.
According to this German missionary that you're talking about, 85,000 souls sent to Srirangapatnam and carrying out the former threat, forcible circumcised. 85,000 Coorgis were circumcised.
Yeah.
And on this auspicious day of circumcision,
he ascends the throne.
Mass. So on the basis of that, that was the day that it happened.
And so he writes about this to the Shah Alam, who's the Mughal emperor, and says, look, I have done all this. I am the true, defender of the faith. So grant me the power of kingship. And the Mughal himself is powerless. He's under Mahadji Scindia, and so he's unable to do. He gives him some title which is something, not worth its salt. Then he sends these letters all the way, emissaries to the Caliphate. And incidentally, the Delhi Sultanate, a lot of them did the same, whether it is the Tughlaqs, the Khiljis and Lodhis. For the legitimacy to rule over Hindustan, they sought sanction from the Caliph. It was only the Mughals who did away with that and they said, we are good enough to rule without anyone's. But Tipu does the same that the Delhi Sultans did. And the Caliph actually sends that permission. And only after he gets that sanction, he calls himself the Padshah of Mysore and gets that big octagonal, throne with a, nice golden umbrella with the Huma bird on it and precious stones and rubies, all this commissioned. Sadly for him, he never got to ascend it because by the time that was completed, he was already killed. So he never, some could say he was exaggerating his crimes to buttress a case for himself. But what sort of an exaggeration is this, one should ask then, that to be called a good Muslim ruler, you have to show the crimes that you commit. But your crimes are your virtues. And that says a lot about what Islamic kingship itself is, which a lot of these leftist historians, including Mohibul Hassan, has written in this book, which I counter him at several places. He doubts the number of Coorgis. He goes to the population saying, itna to the hi nahi, so how could he take so many? Which another historian, Gajendra Mehendale, he actually backtracks the population and says very much the population was maybe around 1 lakh, and out of which to say 80,000 or whatever were circumcised or killed is not an exaggeration. It could be very much possible.
And Coorg is a hill area.
Yeah.
You take the person down.
Yeah.
You pick up, while you're coming down, you pick up from the plains also, right? When you're taking them. It's not necessary Coorg bole to only Kodavas.
Yes.
The Kodavas might have been a 1 lakh population at that time, but there were others who
Who came joined along.
who were laborers in the
Possible.
things there. You know, they were also part of it.
And
right?
how does the number matter? I mean,
Yeah,
as I said,
exactly.
80,000, 90,000, 70,000. How does that make the crime any less? Even if there were 100, it was quite bad enough. So, so this wanton cruelty was always shown as a medallion, and that's why the letters that he writes. So when I said Mohibul Hassan, he's written a very authoritative biography of Tipu Sultan, and he says, you know, the British have exaggerated all these crimes, they have villainized him, and the Muslim historians should not be taken at face value, because to show him as a savior of Islam and as a true Muslim ruler, they exaggerated the crimes. Now both these things, I mean, if you counter, why would the British want to villainize him? Because they defeated and killed him. I mean, nobody was asking them for a justification for that. In fact, if they had to villainize someone, it had to be Hyder, because it was Hyder who defeated them black and blue in every war. The first Anglo-Mysore war, he goes to the gates of Madras and makes the British sign such a, you know, humiliating treaty, and makes all these caricatures of the Madras British governor, you know, licking his feet and all that. And these things go all the way back to London, create shockwaves in the British Parliament. The stock prices of the East India Company collapse. So he's created that sort of a spectre for them. And in the second Mysore War, you had the Battle of Polilur, where Tipu also played an important role, where, you know, Colonel Bailey, he's defeated. Hector Munro, who's the hero of the Battle of Plassey and Buxar, he literally throws his weapons into a tank in Kanchipuram and runs away to Madras to save his life. So the Treaty of Mangalore, as I said, which ended in such grandeur for Mysore. It was Hyder who led these successes.
Stopped the British at Mangalore.
Correct. No, it ended, of course, with Tipu concluding that. But Hyder was the braver man. He humiliated them. But despite that, all the colonial authors, Wilkes, you know, he credits him so much, says Hyder never made a single political mistake in these battles. Even Bowring, who was a commissioner later of Mysore, he writes that Hyder may be, you know, feared, etc., but he's still respected by the Mysore population because of he didn't interfere in their personal lives or whatever. He had all these other lust for women, and which those who bore the brunt, I think they hated him, but rest of them didn't bother. But so all these other people, including Buchanan, so many others who've written, nobody has villainized Hyder as much as him. They all praise his strategy. On the other hand, the only two wars that Tipu fought with the British, the third Anglo-Mysore war and the last one, in the third he lost half his kingdom. He had to give a war indemnity of 3.5 crores, in lieu of which he had to give his two sons, Abdul Khalik and Muizuddin, as hostages. And in the last war, he actually died, literally in the midst of anonymously. So what is the need for the British to villainize him? Whom had they to justify? Of course, they commemorated it, as I said earlier, the paintings, then plays started coming on Tipu, in novels, The Moonstone and others, you have reference to Tipu. All that was there. But they were referring to his original letters, his own writings, his dream registers, these letters to the commanders, which when I read in Bangalore, those protests erupted. He's telling this, go and break this, circumcise the dead also, 4 lakh infidels in Calicut I have converted. He's gloating about this. So there you're not even accepting his own letters.
His own letters, yeah.
Muslim historians should not be, trusted. Kirmani and others who've written Nishane-Haidari and also Tipu's life, they should not be, relied upon, because to exaggerate a good Muslim ruler, they said all this. So that itself is problematic. To show the virtues of a good Islamic ruler, you have to show crimes. Where crimes become virtue, doesn't Professor Mohibul Hassan, when he was alive, didn't he know that this is actually he's fighting a very weak case here? So you can't trust British records. You can't trust Muslim records of the time. You can't even trust Tipu's own letters, his registers and so on. Then what do you trust? Someone sitting in JNU and Aligarh and retrofitting this history to suit their, pernicious politics. Are they the people whom you have to rely upon?
Even when there's documentary evidence,
how much will you deny?
Exactly. It's like today what is happening in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
The religious fanatics don't want to believe that it actually happened, like Operation Searchlight, and this was propaganda.
Yeah.
This was written by scholars and people who India. Hurry, you wouldn't have had independence.
Yeah.
What are you talking? Had it not been for India supporting or arming or whatever the freedom fighters of Bangladesh
Yeah.
or East Pakistan, you wouldn't have that. So even when there's documentary evidence, the world doesn't want to believe, because at that time the world didn't want to believe
Correct.
that there was a ethnic cleansing
Yeah.
happening. And today the world is not willing to believe that there's a religious cleansing happening.
Yeah, it's the same. Every time there's a escape route given, saying,
Yeah.
and the same Mohibul Hassan. There's an Edward Moore who's also a contemporary writer, a colonial writer. He writes quite favorably about Tipu Sultan. Now that is accepted as gospel truth. Then colonial. You can't cherry pick facts.
Yeah.
You can't choose what is convenient to you and say that is true and this is not. So this was quite a big project, which I mean. Irfan Habib and his entire ilk, several edited volumes about Tipu's greatness, how he was this, heralder of a modern renaissance in Mysore and making it a modern state. Basis some few administrative reforms which he did, no doubt about that. Interest-free loans.
But not a freedom fighter.
Certainly not. I mean, what freedom? And see the dichotomy here and the hypocrisy. The same people say India was not even a nation. Only the British gave us a sense of nationhood. Nationalism is a cuss word. Anybody who says I'm nationalistic is almost a Sanghi, a bigot and all that. But the same people say Tipu was a nationalist. He fought for the freedom of India. Both the things can't happen simultaneously. When there was no India, according to you, what India was he fighting for? And he was taking the help of the French to defeat the British.
But they're saying it in the same breath when they say Rani Jhansi, Tatya Tope.
That was about 60, 70 years later, and still probably. But even that, honestly speaking, I think they were all fighting for themselves.
Yeah.
It was
the
only
nationhood concept at that time. Yeah.
correct. The only good part was there. I think they all joined together as a combined force. Even then, I don't know if they were talking about India and its liberation. They hated the British because of the doctrine of lapse. And there, even the commoners, whether it was the Sepoy Mutiny, as it was called.
So let's come back to the Deccan.
Yeah.
Now
We'll
that, because we talk enough about the North, it's necessary for the North to know about
the South. So
the
when
South.
people, even news anchors ask me, so was Tipu the Aurangzeb of the South? I say, no, Aurangzeb was the Tipu of the North. I think that should be the, why should everything be someone of the, South?
It's like when people say Siri Fort, they say Siri Fort के सामने है, they say तुम जानते भी हो Siri कहाँ से आया? Because they were Sir of, they were Sirs put one on top of the other, Khilji only I think, and built a fort with the Sir. And where did he get the idea? Probably, or one of them got the idea from the other, was this beheadings that were happening. Since we have already talked about Coorg, and I'll be accused that you're only doing Karnataka, you're not doing the Malabar. So let's go about what he did, the forced mass circumcision, the conversions, the brutality, gang raping of women in the Malabar region.
So all of those, I mean, the Kerala as we see today, there were 5 principalities towards the north, which was the Malabar, Chirakkal, Kodtanad, Vatakara, then Calicut and Palaghat. Oh, the words are quite tough to pronounce for me, being a non-Malayali. And then there was a Cochin and the southern Kerala, which was Travancore. So all the 5 top, principalities, through deceit, through other ways, Hyder had anyway conquered. Even the Zamorin of Calicut, Manavikrama, he was actually literally burnt himself in the palace to, save himself and so on, and not be converted by Hyder. So those 5 northern principalities were acquired. Even Cochin became a vassal state of Mysore. It was only Travancore that kept pushing back and not, succumbing. The Martanda Varma and then, Balarama Varma and all these people who
very rich kingdoms, principalities. These were very wealthy.
Pepper trade, the crops and the fertile, lush greenery everywhere. And so he had put these 5 kingdoms of the north under their control. There was also the Kannanur Ali Raja of the Arakkal family, who was the only Muslim ruler there, who was inviting Hyder, his co-religionist, to come and attack. And that is how later the Arakkal Bibi of Kannanur also comes into play, who becomes an ally of Tipu. Then she betrays him, comes back, all kinds of things she does. So after these 5 kingdoms of the north are acquired, but the Nayars and the Thiyas and other communities, they never accept Mysore's hegemony. Constant pushing back. So Hyder also commits all those crimes that I mentioned. But I think with Tipu, it goes to an extreme even there. And I think Calicut or Kozhikode faces the maximum brunt of his tortures. 4 lakh people, according to his own words, converted there. And almost all the temples have listed the names. Tirunavaya, Trikkandiyur, so many names like that, which are tough for me to pronounce or remember, but all of them, broken. And there's a journalist called Tirur Dinesh who has written recently. He's done a lot of, field work, gone the destroyed temples of Kerala or something. Where are they? About that. And he's gone and actually verified in the Malappuram district, in Calicut, all these places, Palghat, several such temples. So there's one.
They take the shivling, run away, hide it somewhere.
That's what our ancestors, poor thing, did all the
so
time.
So many of them.
From Kashi to Guruvayur, it's the same story across the country. Nathadwara, Srinathji, everywhere. And so here also there's some, I forget the name of the mandir, but there's a Shivlinga which these people try to, attack and so on. The Shivlinga even now bears the marks of the sword on it, but they couldn't apparently take it off, and so their ire falls on the Nandi that is outside, and so they behead it. And even now apparently the place is such that without a headless Nandi that is there. Now when you do a Khandit Murti, you don't do puja to that. So then the Zamorin called for a prashna to be done, the Deva Prashna, and then it came that don't remove this was so sacred that even he could not take it off. So it has not become Khandit, so you can continue the puja and worship there. Even the Guruvayur temple, which all of us go to, there too Tipu's army tried to demolish that, and they again overnight they take off the Murti, the Guruvayurappan, and they take it to Travancore, to a place called Ambalapula, and that place, after Tipu's hold over Malabar went away, that's when temporary home, even that is worshipped even now. So there are so many such, again, living memories. These may not be documented. Now the same people who say subaltern history, everything is not documentation, history lives in oral traditions.
So फिर ये क्या है?
These things, but where is the documentation? So this constant thing of shifting goalposts, whatever you say is not enough. I show you oral history, but this is concocted. I show you a written evidence, that is exaggeration. Then what do you, as I said, you sit in a room, air-conditioned room in Aligarh, and then cook up these stories. Is that all what we need to believe? These are living examples which people have even to this day. And Calicut too, there are these, Bartholomew, one of these, the missionary who writes, in Calicut how babies would be first killed and hung to the necks of the mothers, who would then have to see their own babies being slaughtered and then hung to their necks, and they were also hung. It's gruesome, the kind of, and I think that is why the Bombay Malayali Samajam and others, when the sword of Tipu Sultan came and none of this was spoken about there. He said this is a huge affront to what our ancestors faced. How can you airbrush history in this manner?
Yeah, and you've mentioned that in your book in great detail about how the Guruvarayappan temporary refuge in this Ambalapuza temple, if I don't know whether I'm pronouncing it properly, Pura, okay, temple, and how the prayers happen, and then you talk. There's this book that you mention, Destroyed Temples of Kerala.
That's the Tirur Dinesh.
So you can see that about where all it was. Like there are the list is endless.
Yeah. And William Logan in the Malabar Manual, they're Jesuit missionaries. They are the accounts of the Zamorins family. They have also listed, what all. I've quoted actually some of the Zamorins. Zamorin was the ruler of Calicut, the Samudrin that became Zamorin, and so he writes about the list of temples of their family which were destroyed.
So there's this, the first decade of Tipu's rule, and I'm reading out from the book, the Nayars and the people of Malabar continue to suffer the worst of tortures. So he says killing, converting, circumcising, breaking temples, defiling them, feeding them beef. Yeah. Then the mockery of the matriarchal system of Kerala, polyandry in Coorg, these were that. Then he goes on to write, he mentions about the Portuguese Roman Catholic missionary who stayed in Malabar, who writes and talks about Tipu, and he says this is about Malabar region, he first tied up the mothers and then suspended the children from their necks. The cruel tyrant, writes this Portuguese Roman Catholic missionary, he says the Christians, the Christians and heathens, which is Hindus, were to be brought out naked, made and made fast to the feet of elephants. That means they were tied to the feet of elephants, which were then obliged to drag them till their limbs fell off in pieces. And these are gory details I'm reading out just so that you rethink if you are talking about Tipu the Brave One. Drag them till their limbs fell in pieces from their bodies. Why? Just because they are non-Muslims, they are Christians and Hindus. At the same time, he ordered all churches and temples to be burned or pulled down and destroyed in some manner. Christian and pagan women, which is Hindu women, were compelled to marry Mohammedans. The pagans were deprived of the token of their nobility, which is a lock of hair called kudumbi, which is, kudumi. And every Christian who appeared in the streets must either submit to be circumcised or hanged on the spot. This was in 1789, so it wasn't too long ago that it happened. There are living memories of this. This is in the Malabar region.
And that's why it was called the Padayotta Kalam, the military regime, which is a lot of Malayalam literature and so on, is rife with that. And I think Sridhar Menon, one of these scholars there, writes what it did to Kerala's social and economic, conditions. What was, we were speaking about a fertile land, so much of greenery, agriculture. Most of the peasants, they ran away either to the hills or to the forests. And so agriculture almost dwindled. What was a wonderful green land became a cheerless desert almost. Pepper trade, almost collapsed. The ports of Kerala, which was buzzing right from the medieval times and, 8th, 9th centuries, they began to wear a deserted look. Industry, whatever trade, commerce, that almost,
So Tipu is not considered a hero even among Muslims in Malabar region?
No, so that was the thing. So he converted many of them and they became the Mappilas. Yeah, and so much later in 1921 you have the Mopla
rebellion.
Yeah. It was a carryover of this time. And Sridhar Menon writes, so when these Moplas come back to Kerala, so much of social friction between the two communities, the few Hindus who had survived or the Christians who had survived and the Maplas. And so the social unrest, the cultural extermination, and to those who say, kingship is associated with violence, so everyone was violent. Of course, everyone was violent, but some were more violent than the others, and that is something to be noted. And you have the United Nations Convention on prevention of the crime of genocide.
Nazi,
in 1948, just after the World War. It clearly says if there is an intent to actually target someone on the basis of identity, race, color, religion, sex, whatever, religion and everything. So that is actually termed as genocide. So by that standards also, even of today's standards of definition, we can call this as a genocide of the Hindus and Christians of South India because they faced that because of who they were, not because they were. So what were those poor peasants of Mangalore Christians or those Iyengar children? What did they do to him to actually come down like that on them? And why choose the sacred days of their religious calendar?
Lent and
the Ash
Naraka
Wednesday
Chaturdashi.
Naraka Chaturdashi. You could do it on any day. So it's cultural subjugation also, religious and cultural subjugation. So it's very kosher to say all this thing, it was everybody was violent. But tell me examples where the Wadiyars also, they were also cruel in their wars earlier. In Mysore, the practice was of the opponent, they cut off the ears and noses, and malas are made of ears and noses and tied to fortresses, as grotesque that would sound. But how many, when they attacked, there was this Ranadullah Khan from Bijapur who was constantly attacking Mysore, and Ranadhira Kanthirava Narasaraja Wadiyar, the famous, on whom Dr. Rajkumar also has a Kannada movie, he attacked him back. How many Muslims did he convert to Hinduism? So these things that people talk today to give a cover fire for atrocities like this, not calling it out for what it is, I think that is very, very dangerous. Denial, at least acknowledge the tortures that the ancestors of these communities have gone through, of which they carry a living memory, a living wound after 200 years. Forget the justice, they'll never get justice. And what justice and from whom? The perpetrator and the victim are both dead. At least let history be a space where they can heal those wounds and not valorize and commemorate a man who has actually committed these worst of excesses against your ancestors.
Okay, so before we conclude, I want to come to the latter part of it. The superstition of Tipu Sultan. What is this? Just today we recorded this podcast with Tilak Deveshar and Sushant Sareen, and we were talking about how Imran Khan, his wife is a Pirni, and he believes in all the jadoo tonas and all that. And Sushant was saying that there's a large portion of Pakistani politicians who really believe in all this, and somebody putting a live chicken into the fire, and these kind of black magic practices.
Pakistan reminds me, Smita, of another interesting fact. So in 1965, when the Indo-Pak war was going on, there was an Operation Somnath or something that was launched by, look at the term also, Operation Somnath, reminiscent
Ghazni.
of what Ghazni did. And I think they wanted to attack the Somnath Mandir, which had just been renovated. The 5 battleships, the navy ships that they, commissioned, PNS, there was PNS Babar, there was PNS Jahangir, there was PNS Shah Jahan, there was PNS Alamgir, Aurangzeb, and a PNS Tipu Sultan. Now I can understand the first 4 because, what Pakistan today is, the Mughal Empire was a part of that. But sitting in Pakistan, why were they commemorating a South Indian Kannada, province of a Tipu Sultan? And in that lies the answer of what Tipu's legacy is. That, who commemorates him, who celebrates him are the people who use these as, humne unko dikha diya. We have vanquished them.
So Imran Khan idolizes Tipu Sultan.
Yes.
He mentioned it just lately, he has said.
Yes, in the parliament too.
Yeah, so he sees himself as a Tipu, in the sense that not born into a sultanate, not having the legacies of like a Benazir's and her progeny. He's risen from the ranks and the valor of Tipu Sultan. So he sees himself as that. He keeps repeating,
They have learned their history well. It's only we, pea-brained Indians and particularly fed with Marxist history, we give a cover fire for all of this, not realizing that in the process you're actually singing that tune.
So then, now you tell me the similarity now between Imran Khan and Tipu Sultan. Why did he believe in black magic?
No,
What was it?
That I think black magic and others, a lot of them did.
But Hindu priests were called in to do puja
Yes,
and
yes.
all
So
that.
even this whole Sringeri episode, which is
please
brought
explain that.
all the time, in the Third Anglo-Mysore War, you had the large Maratha contingent under Parshuram Bhau, the Patwardhan ruler, coming and invading Mysore from the north, and Sringeri comes on the way. And the most shameful act that happens, where there also it's in popular this thing, the Marathas came and destroyed. It was not the Marathas who destroyed Sringeri, it was the Pindaris. The irregulars, the Pindaris. The name itself is those who are, who consume a lot of grass, addicted to opium, smoked up, addiction, literally in that days. And they didn't have regular pay from the army. So they depended on loot money and so on.
Non-state actors.
Non-state actors with, you could say that.
The Kabailis who came to Kashmir.
Correct.
It's the same thing which
tribesmen.
happened.
Yeah. History repeats itself so perniciously.
So because we don't remember or learn from history.
It the first time. Poor thing keeps trying to tell its,
the story.
So the Lamans, they were also a tribe, and most of these were actually Muslim, in the Pindaris also. So these people were the ones who went on a rampage. And obviously the Shankaracharya Mutt in Sringeri.
And you say that they didn't get salaries. How they survived was on loot.
So
after the war, they would loot, and that is what was their salary.
Correct.
That plunder which they did was what was the spoils of war which they got.
So some of it, you could say the same of Tipu, that, some of the plunder we attribute to him directly. They were irregulars. They were called something Berard or something. They were probably the ones who did this. But in the case of Tipu, there is a clear prescription to the commander: go and do this, go and do that. But
here the Peshwas didn't do it.
Peshwas never did this. So after the plunder happens, even the Sharada Murti is vandalized, and I think something upwards of 60 lakhs or something of jewels and all costly things are taken away from Sringeri. And the Shankaracharya, he sits on a fast unto death in protest. And that sends shockwaves back to Pune. Because if the Shankaracharya died, the Peshwa knew that disaster.
Women were raped in Sringeri
Yes,
also,
yes,
right? Yeah.
yes. All that was done by the Marathas too, and they did quite a lot of those atrocities. So they don't come out in my book smelling of roses.
Smelling of roses, exactly. Yeah.
So when the Sringeri episode happens, so the Peshwa then writes a lot of letters to the Patwardhan in Miraj, saying do something, return all the valuables, and he also writes to the Shankaracharya saying, I will give you all the money to renovate the mutt and reinstall the goddess. At that time, Tipu intercepts that and then says, you don't take money from the Peshwa, I will give you the money too. It's almost realpolitik of trying to snatch a march over your opponent. But truth be told, I have quoted in the book, both Hyder and Tipu had a long-standing, correspondence with the Shankaracharya in Sringeri.
In the book you write, in both these letters, which is the two letters with this Sri Sachidananda Bharati the Third. And you write, in both these letters, he urges the Swamiji, whom he addresses as his Guru,
Jagat Guru,
to offer prayers to Lord Ishvara to ensure the defeat and flight of the enemies and to bring succor, happiness, prosperity to the people of Mysore. And this is between Tipu and Swamiji. Then he writes to the Swamiji that he had heard of the horrors of the Matha had faced when the Maratha horsemen, Kudreyavaru. So those who are riding the horses had grievously attacked and harmed the Brahmins in Sringeri, pulled out and vandalized the idols of goddess Sharda. And looted the place of all its possessions and treasures.
He also quotes some Sanskrit verse. Something, there's a
Sanskrit. In that, Hasavidda Kriteya Karma Rudabhira Anubhuteya, which is the acts of foolishness committed in smiles but without any foresight. One often pays the price through tears and sufferings later. Anubhuteya. Okay. So this is what he says, and he calls it Guru Droha, which has happened. And the Swamiji then flees to Karkala along with 4 of his disciples, which by the way is my hometown.
Oh.
So, yeah. And it's also the Karma Bhumi. Anyway, okay, let's leave that part out. Anyway, so he flees out there. So there is this, this is what a lot of people say, that he supped with the devil. So no offense made to the Shankaracharya of that time, but he did try to save the Matha by making a peace deal with Hyder and with Tipu. With both of them.
And but the proof of the pudding is, one is, as I said, the Peshwa never had sent out letters that on the way go and break all the temples and so on. These people did that. There were so many apologetic letters that came from Pune. Later. And this one, of course, stole a march and, got it reconstructed as one medal in his name, to also assuage the Hindus to an extent. But 1 year after that, the Shankaracharya actually makes a trip to Pune. He's invited at the Darbar there. He's, richly honored and all of that. So if there were tension between the two, he would not have gone there.
But the Sringeri episode is
held up as some secular credentials of Tipu Sultan.
Because this ring of Shankaracharya is also found, which you have
rebutted
out here. So explain to this ring of Shankaracharya to find it.
There's no evidence at all of that. They say he wore a ring with the name Ram on it, and that was given by the Shankaracharya. There's no evidence anywhere that this was actually there. It was found in Srirangapatna after his death, and it was taken off to London. It crossed several people's hands, and I think recently it was also sold in an auction somewhere. And there also the auction product description itself says it's very unlikely that he always wore it, because when his dead body was found also, every detail of what he wore was accounted by Alexander Allen, Beatson and all these officers who went on that search party to look for his body. They say he wore no ornament whatsoever.
No, there was that bejeweled
which they
belt.
took away, the soldiers, to kill him. But there was no other ornament on him whatsoever. Why would they not write this, that he had this nice ring?
Maybe somebody stole it.
stole it, or yeah, maybe,
whatever.
but there's no proof that he always wore it. So you're literally clutching at straws, you know. I mean, he gave some grant here, he did this. Most of those grants also have busted here. They say so many temples. I think a lot of those grants started during Hyder's rule, including what they say in Nanjangud. You know, there's that Hakim Nanjunda. There is a Spatikalinga which they attribute to Tipu, but it was actually Hyder who gave it. His favorite elephant had fallen ill, and someone said this is a very powerful temple. It can solve all maladies, and so the elephant was taken there, some incantations done, and it became fine. And so he said this is Hakim Nanjunda. He's the doctor. So that's how he donated it. But that also is actually attributed to him, even by the temple, actually, Tipu Sultan's donation. But actually the records show something else. It was Hyder. The Guruvayur temple also, on the one hand, he wanted to destroy it. So how did it not get destroyed? There was a guy called Hydros Kuti who was there, who was actually a Nair converted to Islam. He still, there's some affinity to your old religion. So he somehow managed to protect and probably leak the information that he's going to come and attack. And it is at Hydros Kutti's intervention that the Guruvayur temple got saved. And many of those grants, there's some silver cups or something which is given to Ranganatha temple and various places. That also, if you see on the back, it is actually about 50 years before Tipu. It was actually given by someone else. There are double
but there's
entries.
That superstition
So he gives it to the temple, takes it back, and then gives it back in his name. You know, several.
But you write about this superstition that he was told that Ranganatha, the name Ranganatha, which Anand, please watch. This is about.
He's a terror even now for a lot of bigots.
That anything with the word Ranganatha would be.
Survival. Poor Hindus had to come up with all kinds of crazy tactics.
So they told him that anything with the word Ranganatha.
Ranganatha, I think he had some manic fear for that word. And so someone in Melkote, a very senior scholar, he told me this in an interview that these Brahmin priests, so this guy was so superstitious because his life was so uncertain, and particularly after the Third Anglo-Mysore War, when you don't know what's going to happen. Every day you're in tension. Someone could come and kill you. He was sleeping in a hammock which was suspended midair. He was always worried that someone will assassinate him. In that you fall to astrology, divination, omens, dreams, all these things. Do anything to survive. Doobte ko tinke ka sahara type of a thing. So in that these astrologers and Brahmins whom he said, they told him that 3 types of idols you should not molest.
Yedda Kallu.
Yedda Kallu, which is a standing
idol.
I
thought Yedda.
No, Yedda Kallu. Bidda Kallu, which is a fallen stone. And Gunda Kallu, which is a round stone. So that almost covers all the type of Hindu deities, right? The standing idol was the Cheluvanarayan Swami in Melkote. The Bidda Kallu was the Ranganatha in Srirangapatna, lying on the Sheshnag. Gunda Kallu was the Nanjangud Shiva, so the round thing. So he gave many grants to these, and he was specifically told that if you molest these deities, then your rule will end. And Ranganatha you should not touch. Then your rule will end.
The Chamundeshwari temple.
Chamundeshwari also, this Hyder had tried to break. The priest put a fake idol in front, and he comes and that duplicate one with a nose cut or something is still there in the Chamundeshwari temple.
So why did he, if he was such a devout Muslim, why did he ask these Hindu priests to perform pujas for him?
That is the whole hypocrisy of it, which Wilkes also talks of. On the one hand, especially after the Third Anglo-Mysore War, when you had to cough up funds for paying out that indemnity, all the grants of the Hindu temples were taken back. At the same time, the same Brahmins are being asked to do all these japas and pujas and homas and all that for him, which even the Shankaracharya does a Shatachandi homa and a Sahasrachandi japa and all of these things. Maybe, again, survival and to get their dakshinas and so on. They did what they did. But that is a hypocrisy. On the one hand, you disenfranchise them, and on the other hand, take their help only. And he knew astrology quite well himself. He had learnt, he knew how to look at his own chart every day. He was almost like Humayun, so superstitious. Should I put my left leg front or right leg? And that's how he slipped off the library and fell.
But this guy burnt libraries.
Who?
Tipu Sultan.
No.
He burnt documents? No.
Some of the old Wadiyar documents. They were all ground and actually manuscripts given to.
See, I've read your book.
The horse stables, yes. Totally. That was such a small footnote.
Please notice, I even read about how Hyder was getting his shaving done and plucking out the hair. Oh, disgusting stuff. And I was like, why does Vikram document such gory, minute details. But yeah, but it makes you understand what these people were all about. And Tipu was very conscious about his bald head, I think, right? All the paintings and everything has him with the cap.
Correct. So that it covers the
But when
baldness.
he died, there was no
Yeah,
topi.
which is what they document and grandly show that he was hairless on the head.
Okay, I have to ask you before we wrap up. I have to ask you about his sons. That is something which was terrible, which was taking away his sons and the
Yeah.
whole going on this procession and all that. How do you think that impacted Tipu as a father, because he underwent a whole lot of cruelty at the hands of his father.
Yeah.
Now he's a father and he has to give up his sons to the
Correct.
British.
Yeah.
How do you think that impacted him?
Very badly. I think he took it so personally, and so after that, it said he never slept on his royal bed. He said he vowed to himself that till I get back what I lost, I'm going to sleep on coarse grass. I see a lot of parallels, Smita, with what Saddam Hussein. He lost the first Gulf War, and then the Western power somehow tried to implicate him, weapons of mass destruction, invade Iraq and kill him. Very similar story. In the Third Anglo-Mysore War, this guy is not killed but defeated. But the allies, especially the British, kept a close watch on what he was doing after that. This guy was consumed by the revenge to get back. And so in the process, he was writing these letters to Zaman Shah, the Afghan ruler, come and invade India. Over 2 years, let's, flush out the Kafirs from north and south. And then let's unite and form a Islamic caliphate. Divide the whole subcontinent among ourselves. Emissaries to the Shah of Persia, to the ruler of Iran, all kinds of the Turkey Sultan and so on, and the Caliph, of course, and emissaries to Louis the XVI's, court in France.
In France.
And then this whole comedy that happens with this man called Ripaud, who comes from Mauritius, and he says he's an imposter and a thug. And everybody in his close circuit said, don't trust him. But this man trusts him. And there is a Jacobin club which is formed in Srirangapatna. Jacobins were the revolutionary branch in France after the French Revolution. And the Brits hated them because they were anti-royalty, anti-aristocracy and so on. So they form a Jacobin club. And there is a tree of equality or something that is planted in Srirangapatna. This guy is called Citizen Tipu. And they all circle around that tree and sing the French national anthem. So much for freedom fighter of India, singing French national anthems.
Anything to survive, right?
Yeah.
At that
And then
stage.
this man, Report, tells him that in Mauritius there is a ready army of 10,000 people who are waiting to come and help you. And everybody, his courtier, said, no, he's a fraud, don't go. But this one doesn't trust. And so embassy is sent to Mauritius, the Isle of France. And on the way, this Report actually literally rips off a lot of the treasures which are there, and he suddenly disappears into thin air after they reach Mauritius. And the entire emissary, which was supposed to be a secret emissary, is completely made public by Malartic, who's the French governor there. It comes out as a Malartic proclamation, where clearly the deal is we will help Tipu to flush the British out of India and invade and make it ours. And out of the 10,000 that were promised, only 99 actually make their way back to Srirangapatna. Even then he doesn't realize that he's being fooled. He thinks those 99 are given a royal welcome in Mangalore and brought to the Srirangapatna. And then finally, these all are evidence, just like the weapons of mass destruction evidence that was collected against Saddam. They were saying they were intercepting these letters. He was writing to Napoleon Bonaparte. His replies were coming. So all this was documented and kept by Richard Wellesley. So let's go for the final kill. Let's not give him a chance like Cornwallis had done. So the Marathas don't participate in this. It's only the Nizam and the British who invade Srirangapatna in 1798-99. There also he tries his best. He's so prevaricating in his replies. He gives flippant replies to Wellesley. Wellesley tries to, put some sense into him, but he doesn't, listen to him. And finally, the Allied forces are right at the gate of Srirangapatna. And that's where, it's almost like a Greek tragedy, chapter by chapter, verse by verse unfolding. You've surrounded yourself with sycophants who don't give you good counsel. You're a megalomaniac with such a bloated self-image that you are probably as great as God himself. I can command the clouds to stop and all kinds of things like that. The fort of Srirangapatna is breached, and that is kept as a complete secret from him. The few stones are shown, and
What's he doing? Why is it a secret?
because he trusts somebody else, and he can't. He gives away the. After the Third Anglo-Mysore War, all the intelligent people, who many of them were Hindus and Brahmins, they were all removed, and in its place, illiterate. Just if you were a Muslim, you were brought in. So the revenue collection suffered, the administration suffered, and the army, there was no merit to elevate someone to the army. So in the process, you had all these sycophants, Sultan, you are great, and this, that, and some of these French guys also who were there. And the British are there, and even on that morning of, they
fall
keep
of
telling him,
Srirangapatnam, huh?
they keep telling him that, your father had also, when Khande Rao did what he did, he escaped to Bangalore, he regrouped. You also do that. And he was quite open to the idea. He had, arranged some of his favorite concubines and some elephants and treasures and all that to run away from one water gate, which was a secret gate. That also gets closed by Mir Sadiq, his prime minister. So those who say only the Hindus betrayed him, Mir Sadiq and Mir Nadim, who was a Kiledar, both of them also betrayed him. So everyone was fed up of this man who made such loony decisions, a megalomaniac and a psychopath almost, who took Tughlaqi Farmans all the time. And on that morning of 4th May, there's so much of documentation around that, how his morning began. He thought it was just another day.
Who documented this? Did he write it himself? He couldn't have, because he
couldn't
left.
have, yeah. A lot of it from his sons who wrote it. Some the British, interviewed. The British interviewed everybody, and they collected. Even Wilkes, interviews Purnaya. He interviews Rani Lakshmi Ammani. He interviews some of the Sardars of Tipu.
Of his last day.
Of his last day. Of everything that led to the run up.
What was he doing?
He was busy in pujas and incantations. He was studying his own horoscope and seeing that there's a transit of Mars which is going, and till the time it is going on, I don't know much of astrology, but whatever it says, that till it goes in that arch, the fort will hold on after that, and that hour had actually passed. And so he knew somewhere that, the end is near. And he's looking into a iron pot of oil, which they tell him, the nazar utarne ke liye or something, to take away all the bad luck. He is donating elephants to some Brahmins and some Muslim astrologers.
This sounds like Wajid Ali Shah, no?
Yeah, it's very, very Shakespearean, tragedy.
Tragedy.
For all the cruelty, these last hours are quite sad. And then he's about to, break his bread. And that's when they tell him that the enemy is at, shouting sight of, where they are. Then he's alarmed. He said, but they told me there's no breach. And then he realizes the treachery. He tries to run. He goes there, and the other gate, which was not locked, he tells Mir Nadim to open it, and he looks the other way. And that's when he realized that there is treachery. He has only his physician to accompany him, Raja Khan. And this guy, he mounts his favorite mare and goes out. And Raja Khan follows him. And there's a volley or something that hits the mare. The mare dies, and he also hurts his leg. His leg has already been hurt once in Travancore, where he fell off a palanquin at the Netum Kotta war, and he has a perennial limp all his life after that. So his leg is already in a bad state, and he falls, and Raja Khan tries to put him into a palanquin, but in the process both of them fall over each other, tumble over each other, and he literally goes and plonks himself amidst a heap of dead bodies. And those last...
It's a battlefield.
In the fort. In the fort, as he's trying to run away from the fort, and there's no other...
Okay, so the breach has already happened of the fort.
Yeah, they've just come at... you can hear their footsteps. That is the distance they've come, and the Sultan doesn't know about that.
What happened to all the cannons and all that of Tipu Sultan?
Well, so that's what Mir Sadiq and Mir Nadim, when the British were to come in, at that very moment, all the soldiers were taken away to one room at the pretext of giving salaries, and they were all locked up there. So there was nobody to defend the fort. He was left all alone, where treachery had, I think, permeated every brick of the Srirangapatna fort, for which he was to blame himself. And so he's sitting there. I'm just trying to imagine what would be crossing his mind.
He's got into your brain.
The entire life probably zooming past his eyes, and there's a huge bombshell or something that goes, there's mangled masses, flesh going everywhere, and there's a inferno that actually erupts there, And at that time, there are these British soldiers who come there and they look at him, and he's wearing that bejeweled, sword belt. And they don't know, by then his turban has fallen. So they don't even expect that the Sultan of Mysore is there. They come there, and to take that, they strike at him, and he strikes back. He tries to put a valiant fight. For what joy? I mean, he knows that that's the end, but he still tries. Very similar to what the Sinwar thing that happened recently. So he tries to put a fight there, but one of them takes a pistol, and that's
Point
the end
blank,
at the. And Raja Khan is seeing all this, and he has narrated these to the Brits later. But he tries to, act as if he's dead, and that's how Raja Khan is saved. Now, by then, it's sunset, and the whole of the Srirangapatna fort has become literally a scene from hell. Decaying dead bodies everywhere, fires going, and there are vultures, who are, all over the place. And both the British and the family of Tipu Sultan are equally worried. The family doesn't know where he has gone, because only Raja Khan knew this. And the Brits are like, I think he's hiding in the women's apartments or something. And so they try to go there. There's a lot of description of how his sons, they take 1 hour to come back. They are supposed to interview the sons, and they are probably teenagers. And the trepidation with which they face the British who have come right into their father's palace. And then they say, no, we don't know where our father is. And they go and search everything, but he's not to be found. And then a search party goes through those ramparts of hell that Srirangapatna has become. And they're literally making their way through dead bodies, and then they hear a moan or something, and that is of Raja Khan. And he then says, I saw the Sultan going that side last, that's all I know. And then they go there with a mashal, and there's Allen, Beatson, and all these, David Baird, who go there. And there, amidst a heap of dead bodies, they see this corpse, eyes wide open, body is warm, and his hand is still clasping the sword. And Allen writes that we were quite worried whether he's really dead, or he'll suddenly spring up and strike
because
at
by
us.
then the legend has he's become
so much. He had become such a cruel this thing, and a warrior.
And the Brits were also
They were certainly scared of him. I think they just couldn't understand how he would react, because he was so unpredictable. And he says that once the pulse was felt and we knew that he was over,
who identified his sons? Identified the body?
No, Raja Khan. Raja Khan comes
okay.
and then says, yeah, this is him. And I said, then we raised a quiet hurrah, and then the body was taken back to the palace, and a very ceremonial burial, very proper burial was given to him, which is at the Gumbaz in Srirangapatna even now, beside his parents. And then the entire family, a lot of discussion, what to do, whom to install, and so on. And 25 children, I think 13 sons and 12 daughters, all of them are then slowly packed off from there to Vellore, where in 1806 they tried to instigate a mutiny with the Palegar rebellion happening in South India. And that is when the Brits have enough of them. They just pack them off and send them to Calcutta, which is where a lot of his descendants are there still. There's a Tipu Sultan Masjid also in Calcutta. And several of his, descendants are in abjure poverty there. But a lot of people say probably it is poetic justice. They came from that Nagada in which the father was beaten upon for not paying money to the debtor. And now from poverty they rose, and to poverty they went back. But in the midst of that, you had these 40 tumultuous, stormy years of the Interregnum, which was the making and the unmaking of India in some way.
Making and unmaking of India. Interesting. And when you wrote this book, Vikram, I have to come to that part. He lived in your head for quite a while. You didn't write the book because your mother didn't want to. Now that you finished the book...
I'm not going to have a dream register sitting on my pot every morning writing.
But does he come back to you? Like, do you feel that there was...
I really feel, Smita, like I've exorcised a ghost. I think dil ki bhadas nikalni thi. That's why this book turned out to be 900 plus pages. There was so much of suppressed facts, emotions, which I think I put into myself. It's almost cathartic to be speaking about all this in all these podcasts and interviews. I just want to exorcise him from my system, so to say. I thank him, so to say, for giving me this interest into historiography. As I said, otherwise I wouldn't have become a historian. But I think in telling the truth of his life, his atrocities, somewhere all those thousands and lakhs of souls who have, I think, suffered at the hands of a very barbaric ruler, somewhere I feel it's also giving them, if you believe, souls also get closure. The more we talk about them, the more we just acknowledge. As I said, history is not just about recounting dates and figures and facts. It's also a healing space where you say, these things happened. Let's talk about it. You're adding insult to injury if you're not actually, you're denying it also. You're saying these things never happened, this is an exaggeration. So I think in my own healing and my own catharsis, I feel it's also partly some kind of service I think I'm doing to all those anonymous souls. We don't know their names, we don't know anything, but the brutalities that they suffered.
And it's not so long ago, if you actually think. It wasn't so long back. So there are what, 3 or 4 generations after that. So it's that lived experience of it, like, for example, not celebrating Deepavali. These are things which are lived experiences. But then some of the things that you mentioned, I mean, these are areas which I'm familiar with. But I didn't know the reason why it's not happened till I read your book. So I genuinely feel that not just people who have connection with this area, but even those who don't need to know about some of our history. Otherwise, we are doomed to
repeat it. As we drew so many parallels to today's, whether
today,
it was
not just in India. You're talking about the subcontinent, and I mean, you even
Iraq.
brought in Iraq, and you brought in, I mean, so much. Yeah, it happens. So on that note, and before we end, we have to, since both of us are sitting out here, we have to end with the
ceremonial Mysore Pak.
Thank you. And very... You mentioned Anand. Now
it's from Anand Sweets.
Anand Sweets, which is not sponsoring this podcast. So we can meanwhile have this in honor of Anand.
And in honor of Mysore. Which is where the Mysore Pak originated from. And we're talking Mysore history, so... ending it on a sweet note, though we spoke all gory details.
I know.
I hope you can sleep well today and don't have horrific dreams.
But yeah, it is disturbing. Reading it is disturbing. I needed to read it in parts. And I haven't read the whole thing. There are chunks which I haven't read as yet. It's one of those books that you revisit.
Yeah.
You go back and say, okay, and now I need to read the Malabar part. Okay, now I need to read about the Coorg part. Now I need to read about superstition. Like I said, the superstition I read because I was doing this podcast on Imran, and why as a Muslim is he, doing this?
Muslims have a lot of belief in black magic, jinns and all these things. City of jinns, as Dalrymple's
like
book.
East Asians also have.
Yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to know about that and about Imran Khan's fascination with Tipu, and then so...
But at the same time, I think, Smita, when I wrote it, and I'm sure when you read it and when others read it, you also realize how much you've been lied to.
Yeah.
The subterfuge. I mean, that is really appalling for me. And for someone like this to actually have a Tipu Jayanti, would you have a Hitler Jayanti in Israel or Germany? I mean, it's... and that too by a elected state government on taxpayers' money. When, as we discussed, those memories, those wounds are still alive among the Christians, among the Iyengars, among the Kodavas. So don't their sentiments matter. Don't their emotions and what they feel matter. Only your appeasement of a certain community. And the counter to that is as bad. I mean, the BJP doing what it did, that foolhardy Uri Gowda and Nanje Gowda, the two Gowda chieftains whom they said were the ones who killed Tipu Sultan. Now, we know how he his life ended. But they said it was not the Brits who killed him, but it was these two Gowda chieftains who did it. And why they did this? To get the Vokkaliga vote in South Karnataka. That time they didn't have the alliance with JDS. So now they have it and still lost so many by-elections.
These are two mythical characters.
Mythical characters. Nowhere Wilkes or Hayvardhan Rao, even Hindu historians of Mysore never spoke about it. But they invented this huge cutouts in Mandya, and as you go to Mysore, of this Uri Gowda, Nanje Gowda supposed chieftains, literally six-pack abs and buff biceps.
Supposed to have killed Tipu,
Correct.
But they didn't exist actually. That's never been historically done.
Yes, so to valorize the Gowdas as the bastions against the Islamic tyrant and all that. And finally it was the Vokkaliga chief, Swamiji or someone, who came out and told the BJP, don't misuse our, community to, for your petty politics. And that's when that horrible absurdity stopped. Till then, in Kannada media, every second day, there were so-called experts, historians. There was a Uri Gowda. Now, suddenly, everyone has stopped.
After Swamiji came. And
Swamiji, and then, vote bank will go. So this manner in which ideologically, inclined historians, and worse, at least they have some, scholarship and knowledge, worse these politicians of both sides who valorize, who demonize without any facts. I don't know how many read, how many do. I mean, for 200 years, none of the Brit or Mysore historians knew about these Gaudas, but the BJP IT cell somehow came to know that, they were these people. So I think in such times, I think history is a more sober discipline. It is not between these extremes of black and white. When it comes to human characters, I think there are more than 50 shades of grey.
Yeah.
And for me, my attempt in all the books I've written, whether it's Savarkar or this or Bravehearts, and it is to analyze the human mind, why people did what they did. Some things are universal. I think emotions are universal. Love, hatred, envy, jealousy. An 18th century mind, I mean, they didn't love any differently. Romance was no different from what it is probably in the 21st century.
Yeah.
So those are the universal characteristics, though.
And that despotic character of the rulers there, you can see in some
parts of we see in our neighborhood what's happening. So you can, I think, analyze historical personages on that basis, what caused them to do that, so to get into the mind of the character. And thankfully for me, my protagonist left behind copious documents, including what he dreamt about. So I didn't have to rely on all these.
He doesn't occupy your mind, I'm sure, right?
I'm trying to do some puja, something to yellu neeru bittu bandbudi. So I have to really, exorcise this man.
His ghost. Yes. And I'm sure your mother will forgive you for writing it because you've done a human service. So thank you so much, Vikram, for this podcast, for coming here and discussing this this book. So I recommend over your Christmas vacation, read this.
Thank you, Smita.
Thank you.
Always such a pleasure. And I think we go into the depths like no one else does, including your competitors.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for watching or listening to this edition of the ANI podcast with Smita Prakash. Do like or subscribe on whichever channel you have seen this or heard this. Namaste. Jai Hind. Click here to watch the previous episodes.